What's up, guys? Welcome to the big fat Q&A. Maybe that's what I'll title it. So all about cutting, weight loss, fat loss, getting leaner, getting shredded, getting diced, getting ripped, or just getting a little bit leaner than you are now. So this video is going to be fairly unedited, fairly unpolished. If I fudge up a word or fuck up a word, I'm not going to edit it out. It's just going to be what it is. Also, I have a fan here. Trust me, this is 100% necessary, because last Q&A took about 4 hours of filming, was 160 questions, and by question 100, I was dying. So this is definitely necessary. Hopefully it's not too loud and you can still understand me. So how to find your question, or how to find your answer. Basically, I responded to everyone in the community tab, and you can just search your name, find what answer it is, and then look on the progress bar to find out where exactly it is. But if you are interested in cutting, I would say, if you can, if you have the time, watch the thing in the entirety, just because there's going to be a ton of good, useful information. All right, so first question: how do you decide what comes after the cut, assuming you have no specific goals like looking good at the beach or a competition coming up? Do you maintain, start bulking again since you're super primed to build muscle, or do you gain? Well, it's basically up to you. It depends. If you have built all the muscle you want to build, like you've already done a bunch of bulks and cuts, like you're near your genetic muscular potential, and you're happy with your size, you can just maintain forever. You know, I know some people who they're happy with their size and they just go down to a lean physique and they maintain that as best as they can for the rest of their lives. It's not super common because most people want to get bigger forever, but it does happen. As for bulking again, I would say take it slowly. One thing I do see is that people cut down and then they bounce back up very quickly. Okay, so they cut really hard and then they have the show, or the summer is over or whatever, and then they ricochet up super quickly. And you can put on a ton of fat very quickly if you overeat. You know, anyone with abs is like 2 weeks of eating away from not having abs. So I would say, no matter what you do, make sure you have a plan and make sure you do it methodically, and don't get carried away, don't get emotional, don't like justify your eating because now you're bulking, etc. Because you want to build that runway as long as possible. If you're maingaining, if you are lean bulking, you want to do it slowly. Okay, if you're ricocheting up, it's going to be a lot of fat gain, which is probably not what you want. Question number 2, generally how long can you lose weight on a 500 calorie deficit until you plateau? Well, there are 2 ways to interpret that. Let's say your maintenance is 3,000 and a 500 calorie deficit is 2,500. Do you mean staying with 2,500 until you plateau? In that case, it depends. It could be a few months, because you know your metabolism is going to go down, your activity is probably going to go down, maybe your counting and your tracking isn't going to be as accurate when you're more hungry later in the cut, and you're just going to be a smaller person, less fat, perhaps less muscle, hopefully not, but maybe, and you're going to be just expending fewer calories. So it could be a few months until what used to be a 500 calorie deficit is now a 0 calorie deficit, and now you have plateaued. The other way to look at it is the 500 calorie deficit is constant. So as your metabolism goes down, as your activity might go down, you also lower your calories. And this is something that happens to basically everyone. Some people's metabolisms are more adaptive than others, and the metabolism sort of tanks more. I think there are maybe some ways around that, which I'll probably do a full video on. But if you keep that 500 calorie deficit and you keep it going down, you'll never plateau. And if you do plateau, it's a sign that it's not really a deficit. Might be water retention, but if it's over a few weeks, it means that you're not actually in a deficit. And that's the third thing. If you're not tracking very accurately, that 500 calorie deficit might be like a 200 calorie deficit, or even not a deficit at all, or maybe even a surplus. Okay, most people are absolutely miserable at actually tracking calories accurately. Question number 3, how much cardio is too much, whether it's low intensity steady state, LISS, or high intensity interval training, HIIT, and how many hours per day is enough? super individual, okay? There are some people who get shredded on no cardio, okay? Even just like walking. And walking isn't really cardiovascular exercise if it's just not on an incline, normal, healthy body weight person. Walking, that's not really cardio. I'll do a full video on that. But, you know, how much cardio is too much? It's super individual. And then also, you know, too much for what? Too much for health? Like too much for adapting to your weight training still? Too much for losing muscle? Like those are all completely different things. How many hours per day is enough? Yeah, it could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, could be zero. It really just, it's super individual. And this is something that you will have to experiment with in your training, or your coach will have to work with you, etc. I have some clients on zero cardio. I have some on, you know, just walking, and I have some others on, you know, high intensity interval. It really does depend on your schedule and based on your personal preferences as well. I know this is a shitty answer, but it's kind of a shitty question. Offensive, I know, but it is super individual. Number 4, do you have any recommendations for getting in fiber for satiety on a cut? You mentioned you take a fiber supplement in a previous video, so do you have a go-to vegetable, fruit, or supplement that helps you with hunger? Yeah, I just take Metabucil, but I also have vegetables. It doesn't really replace vegetables. I think supplements are a supplement. You still have to, or you should have whole foods most of the time. Basically, whatever you want, whatever vegetables and fruits you like are the ones you should actually go for. If you have to force down a vegetable, it's not going to be sustainable. I actually do like broccoli. I know it's a meme, but I actually don't mind broccoli. A lot of them are Chinese vegetables, which don't really have a great English translation, like sheng cai, bo cai. Like they have an English translation, but it's not really actually the same. Bok choy, etc. I'm not really a picky eater. My wife will cook and she'll add in vegetables, and I'll eat the vegetables, and I tend not to overthink it. Number 5, how can a powerlifter best retain their strength when cutting down weight? So keep it fairly high protein. I would say at least a gram per pound. Make sure you're still attacking heavier weights if you can. Like if you say, oh, well, my strength is going to decrease, and you start like pumping the pink dumbbells, yeah, you're going to lose strength because you don't have anything to adapt to. However, you also have to keep in mind that you might have to modify your training. Volume might have to go down slightly, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But basically keep high protein, go slowly, keep your sleep in order. Don't get excessive with the cardio. If you start just like distance running and you're a power lifter, odds are you're not going to retain your muscle and your strength, okay? Because that is going to impact things more. There's a bunch of enzymatic pathways, hormonal pathways. Your cortisol is going to be higher, AMPK is going to be higher, mTOR is going to be lower. Like basically distance running does compete pretty actively with strength training, especially if they are done in excess, and especially if it's done in a caloric deficit. So I would say do as little cardio as necessary. Keep your carbs around the workout as well, and keep your volume maybe not as high as it was. Like you might have to sacrifice a little bit of volume, but don't just completely tank your volume either, and try to keep using as heavy of weights as you realistically can. Number 6, how do you balance your diet social life? Easy, just don't have a social life. Duh. I'm in high school and food seems like such a social thing. It's very hard to stay in a deficit. This is not easy. Keep in mind that friends, acquaintances, co-workers, for those who are older, they will try to tempt you. They will actively try to tempt you even if they know you are trying to lose fat. Because people are dicks sometimes, and sometimes it's like done in a good-hearted manner. Like they see you eating your shitty food or not eating at all, and they're like, oh, well, you know, have some of my food. You know, I ordered McDonald's like for everyone, and here's your fucking huge burger that is not going to help you for your goals, but will make me feel better about my choices. That kind of thing. It's tough, especially if your parents are cooking for you and you don't really have a choice with what you eat. But I would say, yeah, just make the best of what you can. Often, and I've done this in the past, when you have your own choice of food, you fuck it up. and then you also fuck it up when it's a social situation, and you're like, oh, it's the social situation, but you also messed up your diet when it was your own choice. Like you ordered delivery or something when it was on you, and then you're like, oh, it's the social life. There's probably somewhere you can balance it. So if you have a big social event planned, just eat less earlier or eat less later, or make better, lower calorie, higher protein choices because you're going to have this sort of cheat meal social event kind of thing. All right, question 7. With the bulking, cutting, and recomp phases of dieting, how long should each stage last for long-lasting, sustainable results? Well, again, this varies quite a bit. I would say your bulks should be fairly long and fairly slow. Your cuts should be faster, just because you want to spend more time bulking, because muscle growth is a slower process. Okay, it just takes a lot more time. As for recomping, again, this depends on your goals. Some people can just recomp the entire damn time. If you're like 15 to 20% body fat and you don't have like super ambitious goals, you can just recomp your entire life, basically. And that can work really, really well. But if you're more competitive and maybe you want to maximize results, I think lean bulk followed by mini cut, lean bulk, mini cut is going to be just a better strategy. What you want to avoid is bulking too fast, too hard, getting fat, feeling like shit, and then cutting, but cutting in a half-assed way, so it's kind of slow. So you bulk super fast and then you cut really slow, and so your amount of time you spent gaining muscle is not very fast, and then you're cutting, and so you're in this sort of like perma-cutting state, and then like you get lean enough and then you bulk, but you go too hard. And so really be careful with your bulks. It requires just as much discipline and attention to detail when you're bulking as when you are cutting. Number 8, what's your take on the video of Greg Doucette to Geoff Nippard's diet breaks versus refeeds, and what do you think is the most effective way of losing weight? I saw Jeff's video. I didn't see Greg's response to it. He has so many videos, I literally just don't have the time to watch all of them. I'll watch them occasionally, but not as much as I used to. He has a crazy upload schedule. I just can't keep up with all of them. So I haven't seen his take, so I'm not really sure. I would say both have advantages and disadvantages. Diet breaks are nice to just, if you've been counting calories really strictly, to gain that skill of not counting calories, which a lot of people never ever master. Whereas refeeds, it's more short term. You get this spike in leptin. It's I would say both have value. It really just depends on how you want to structure things and your personal preferences. All right, number 9, what's your opinion on hardcore diets like the protein spared modified fast Lyle McDonald recommends? I hate long cuts and would rather endure a protein spared modified fast for a week or two after bulking for 6 to 10 weeks. It can work, especially if it's short term. So a protein spared modified fast is exactly what it sounds like. You basically don't eat anything except for extremely high protein, low carb, low fat foods. It's very shitty. It's definitely not fun. I wouldn't say it's healthy, but in the short term, it can work. I would say give it a shot as long as you don't have any underlying health issues, and recognize it's not really sustainable. All right, number 10, any tips for cutting from lean-ish, say 14 to 15%, to lean, like 10 to 11%? Go slow. The less fat you have on your body, the slower the rate of weight loss, and just the more careful you have to be in terms of retaining your muscle as well as your strength. Plus, realistically, you might lose some strength, especially if you had a high level of strength to begin with. So if you're like a world champion powerlifter and you felt really good at 14, 15%, if you go down to 10 or 11%, you're getting like absolutely fucking diced, or even lower, it's not really realistic to keep the same strength just because you do lose fat around the joints and you're sort of in a depleted state, less water, leverages change, they generally get worse, etc. So I would say go as slow as possible, and realize that you might have to do like half a pound a week, or maybe even less. Question 11, how often should you weigh yourself, take measurements, and photos during a cut? I would say weigh yourself every day. I know this is a controversial thing. Some people are like, weigh yourself once every week. That doesn't work very well. okay? Because fluctuations. If you weigh yourself week 1 and it's a low point, just a low fluctuation, you hit a trough on that weigh-in, and then the second week, you hit a high point, you might think you're gaining weight, whereas the trend is actually down. So as long as you realize there's going to be fluctuations, I would say get as much goddamn data as you can. Okay, you can see fluctuations, you can see how your body responds to certain foods. Like, oh, I eat oatmeal, it bloats me, it makes me retain water, I get a high weigh-in. I eat rice, I flush water out. Like, you can actually notice these things if you take in a lot of data. So I would say every day. If you don't want to weigh yourself for every single day, even though it takes 10 goddamn seconds, do it a few times a week. But I would say once a week is not enough. As for taking measurements like biceps and quads and waist and stuff, I would say every week to 2 weeks is fine. And same thing with photos, every couple of weeks. You probably won't see stuff on a day-to-day basis anyway, and at that point it's really becoming excessive. I've heard of bodybuilders fucking taping their arms multiple times per day and shit like that. That's fucking weird and definitely unnecessary. Weigh yourself once a day, that's fine. Measurements and photos every couple of weeks, even once a month is fine, just because those don't fluctuate as much, and they're just not as necessary to get in as much frequent data. All right, next question. Pretty basic, but how would you approach cutting when trying to maintain as much muscle as possible? Given that there is less water weight, the muscles may appear smaller than when on a bulk, so how can one gauge muscle size accurately? So measuring is a good way. If you shouldn't lose that much, like arm size, quad size, you should notice the waist going down a lot more than those other measurements. You have to realize that you will lose some size in most circumstances from the water, and then also from the fat. Like a muscular arm is going to look different than a fatter arm. And so if you go from like 20% body fat down to 10% body fat, you will almost certainly lose arm size, especially if you're more advanced and you're not going to be gaining a ton of muscle during the cut anyway. If you're a beginner, you might gain enough muscle to offset the fat loss, therefore your arms are actually the same size and they look bigger because you're leaner. But I would say if you're advanced, you have to accept like a 20-inch arm when you're bulked up is not going to be a 20-inch arm when you're cut down. It just doesn't work that way. Same thing for quads, and to a greater extent because you tend to store more fat on your quads. All right, next question, lucky number 13. If you eat enough protein, 10% of the way there, yeah, and do cardio, but while you were doing cardio, you were training harder than last time, LOL, but you don't do resistance training, will you lose muscle mass? Give answer for different time spans. 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, 5 months. I feel like this is a fucking test question. I forgot to add that this is being done while in a deficit. Yeah, obviously. Why are you not doing resistance training? If your goal is to retain muscle, you need to be fucking doing resistance training, okay? Even just body weight, bullshit, calisthenics, do what you can. But if you don't do any resistance training, it doesn't fucking matter how much protein you eat. Your body's going to adapt by losing muscle, especially if you're doing cardio. So protein can help a little bit, but it's like there's no stimulus to fucking keep the muscle, and so your body is just gonna get rid of it because it's trying to optimize your survival, and you clearly don't need that muscle mass to actually survive. Number 14, how to deal with the demoralizing weight loss stalls that occur when your body tries to maintain its weight. I don't know why that's in quotations. During a deficit despite losing fat. Not seeing the scale move is gay, despite it only lasting 1 to 3 weeks. Thanks. 34-year-old Orthodox Christian Greek vegan trans male from Australia. Sorry, I don't answer questions from Australians. Alright, so you just deal with it. You just realize, okay, I've plateaued, and you keep pushing, and then you get through the plateau. Everyone loses weight differently. Some people are very linear. They'll lose 0.1 to 0.2 kilos every single day, and everything's very predictable. Other people won't. They'll fucking flatline for a week or 2, or maybe even 3, and then they'll lose it all at once. This is mostly hormonal, cortisol most likely, but just nut up, dude. just because it's something that's demoralizing doesn't mean you have to give up or anything, or change your plan. Make sure you're in a deficit. Count accurately if you're counting. If you don't count, you might not know. But yeah, not seeing the scale move kind of sucks, but it's not the end of the world, especially if you know that you're in a deficit and you know you're making progress. So yeah, don't overthink this too much. Just keep pushing, basically. All right, number 15, how would nutrition around workouts differ during cuts versus gaining phases, given that calories have been lowered? Since pre-workout nutrition has an important role in performance, while post is said to be vital for recovery. Yeah, try to keep your carbs around the workout as much as you can. That seems to help most people pretty well. And then cut calories away from the workout if you have to. The worst thing you can do is like you cut your calories around the workout because you want to burn more fat with the workout. That tends to just deplete glycogen even more, raise cortisol even more, and is generally just not a great idea. So realize that you have to cut the energy from somewhere, and you're probably best off cutting it from away from the workout, whether that's in the evening or the morning or the afternoon or whatever. But I would keep post, pre, and then peri during the workout calories in there as much as you can. That should be the last thing you cut out, if at all. I would say you should actually never cut that out. Even when I'm cutting and trying to get like fucking diced, I'll have like 150 to 200 grams of carbs during the fucking workout. So I'll have a liter of skim milk, not for everyone, I know, and then like a liter and a half of orange juice. Just that keeps me fucking amped and charged during the workout, helps me get in more volume. I'm super insulin sensitive during that time anyway, so it just gets absorbed through those GLUT4 transporters and sucked up by the muscle, and it's actually used. It's not converted to fat, plus it helps recovery as well. So I would say never ever take away from your workout carbs unless you're doing something like a depletion stage before a bodybuilding show, something like that. All right, next one. Will losing more than 2 pounds a month when you are obese or overweight result in a decreased muscle mass if done for a short period of time? No, 2 pounds a month is super slow. Especially if you're obese, you can probably target that per week and be completely fine. So don't be that conservative with your deficit, especially if you have a lot of fat to lose. I see a lot of people pussyfoot around their diet. No, fucking go hard. This is one thing where Ryan Humiston, he said he had a diet video a while back and everyone was slamming him for it. But I was kind of like, he said, go super hard, create a large deficit. And I was like, that's kind of what I do when I'm, 20% body fat. I cut hard. There's no point in like chipping down into a 200 or 300 calorie deficit. No, fuck that. I want to get that done as quickly as possible. And so I'll go into like 1,000 calories or more, at least for the first part of the diet. Next one, how many grams of food do you recommend having at a meal to prevent binging later on in the day? Grams, really? I'm not going to answer this to the gram. Obviously, this is very individual. There have been studies, I think, I'm not going to link or find, but it shows that most people want to have a certain volume of food. So try to go with more low calorie density foods, vegetables, fruits, maybe whole grains, that kind of thing. Liquids in some cases, although those aren't always satiating. But basically, volumize. You can go to Reddit/volume eating, I think it's called, and try to go for foods that are not as energy dense. Number 17, why did you decide to cut? I tend to cut every single summer, not like a super shredded kind of thing, but I'll cut back down to like 11, 12, maybe 10% or so. I didn't cut last year just because I was just getting back to the gym after the COVID restrictions here in China. It was like April or so, and I was already fairly lean, and so I wanted to bulk. I didn't want to like start squatting and deadlifting again and have to eat like low calories or anything. Fuck that. But typically I'll cut every single summer, not like a diced way, but just getting leaner. Partly is that it's ridiculously hot here in Shenzhen, and I just don't feel as comfortable or as good with a layer of insulation. At 20% body fat, it's kind of miserable, even just like walking around and stuff. Number 20 something, let me check. 18. These are going by slow. Should the deficit come from caloric restriction or cardio if you want to maintain strength? So More Plates, More Dates actually came out with a recent video, which I watched, and it was very, very good. You want to have activity, okay? If you're sitting on your ass most of the day, that's not going to be great for maintaining strength, because you're going to have to cut from calories, and your calories are going to be lower, obviously, and you're going to maybe even be deficient in micronutrients just because you can't eat very much food. And so you're better off chucking in small little bouts of exercise, 10-minute walks, etc., stand efforting style. I think that's a great idea. On the other hand, if you only do cardio and it's like running or sprinting or you know, something that might deplete you, that again is going to compete with your strength training. And so I would say that is suboptimal. So I would say if it's walking or just general activity combined with, you know, a normal amount of food, you might even increase your food during a cut. You know, that happens if you can actually increase your activity quite a bit, increase the food quite a bit, and that's actually a pretty good situation. But I would say you can also do a mixture. It really is up to you. Just don't get too carried away with either cutting your calories down or increasing the activity. Doing a little bit of both is probably the best situation. 19, do you have a good guess on how accurate or truthful the calories burned on, let's say, an Apple Watch, Fitbit, FitnessPal, cardio machines, etc. are? For example, a rough estimate or percentage of how accurate or truthful it is, I would say blah, blah, blah. All right, so they're generally not accurate, but they're consistently inaccurate. So, you know, don't think like your Fitbit says you have 4,000 calories burned and so it's true. I would say 10 or 20% is highly likely that they're overestimating. I've had days where the Fitbit showed me a number and I'm like, no, no, that'd be nice, but no. And I would say they almost always overestimate. I don't know why this is. You would think like very, very large companies could get this shit sorted out so the algorithm doesn't almost always overestimate and potentially make people fat because they're like, oh, I can eat so much more food than I think I can. Like, no, okay. So I would say 10 to 20%, but I guess it depends on how active you are. If a cardio machine does not ask your weight, there's a good chance it's bullshit. For a rowing machine, it might be accurate, but if it's like an elliptical and it doesn't ask you, or a treadmill and it doesn't ask your goddamn weight, you don't know if it's accurate, okay? Because moving your own body weight is going to vary based on how much body weight you have, right? Pretty simple. Next question, does adding 2 or 3 extra sets for weak body parts, chest and buys for me during a cut, affect recovery? Depends how close you are to the edge and your recovery capacity and how hard the sets are and the rep range and the exercise. So maybe? Next one, how much strength should a person expect to lose when trying to cut? So it depends on your body fat percentage. It depends mostly on how much strength you already have. If you've never weight trained before and you're cutting and you're starting to weight train, you should absolutely gain strength. If you're a world-class powerlifter and you were like 25% body fat and now you're trying to get fucking diced and you're 10% body fat, you will lose strength. You will absolutely lose strength, even if you run a cycle of steroids, most likely, okay? So it does depend on where you are at, as well as how quickly you try to lose the weight, and then your training and your sleep and your diet. There's just so many factors. You should try to push back against it, but you should also realize that, especially on some lift, it's sort of going to be inevitable. If you lose 10 kilos of body weight, let's say you go from like 20% body fat down to 10% body fat, your bench press will probably go down. It might increase if you train it really, really well, but there's also a good chance that it's going to stagnate or even go down, just because your leverages do change quite a bit. 23, when people say cardio burns muscle, exactly how much cardio are they talking about, or when does cardio start affecting your gains? Again, I answered a question about this. You can search in the bar and find the other one, but it's individual. It does vary. It depends on the type of cardio as well. A Stairmaster is not going to do as much damage as running, just because the recovery cost, the impact, etc. And it's going to be very individual. I find that it affects muscle more, perhaps because I have a history of distance running. And so if I start, doing a lot of distance running, my body's like, oh, we're doing this again. I remember this. We better lose all that muscle. All right, this one's a personal question. If it's super personal, I'm not going to answer it just because it's more of a consultation, which is basically what I do for a living, coaching, training plans, etc. So if it's like very specific to you, not a Q&A kind of thing. How to learn how to stop overeating, learning portion control, and how to control excessive amounts of hunger. It's a skill, so you might have to count calories initially, but eventually you'll just learn how to say, okay, well, this is a suitable amount of carbs. This is how much many vegetables I need to stay satiated. This is how much protein I need to get 30 or 40 grams per meal or whatever. So it just takes time. It's not something that anyone pops out of the womb being able to do. How to control excessive amounts of hunger: fiber, water, protein, not eating very, very delicious foods. I know that sounds shitty, but eating less highly palatable foods is going to just make it easier to control your calories. If you're trying to cut and you're struggling and your diet is like pizza, hamburger, chocolate, it's going to be really tough for most people. 25, Mike Isertel says that doing tons of cardio is better for short-term fat loss, but limiting it is best for long-term results. Why? Well, this might come from his enhanced point of view, but it's probably true for naturals as well. Doing a lot of cardio, especially low intensity, so just walking a lot basically, is going to increase your fat burning potential. If you're sitting on your ass, you just can't lose fat that quickly, okay? Because your calories would have to go super, super low. And even then, like, if you're maintaining on 2,000 calories, you might be better off just increasing your activity. But limiting it is best for long-term results. Yeah, because it's not because you adapt to the cardio, it's because it becomes time prohibitive, it just becomes tiresome, and it does compete with the energy you need for weight training, which should take priority. Plus, there are enzymatic and hormonal types of things that do go on and make it difficult to gain muscle when you're doing lots of cardio, particularly if you are natural. So I would say, yeah, if you want to lose fat very quickly, a fair amount of cardio can be very useful. But long term, if you want to maintain, retain, and potentially even gain muscle during a cut, you don't want to go crazy with the cardio. Is strength training superior for fat loss? Also give the reason. Superior to not strength training? Yes. Superior to cardio? Well, if you had the choice between only doing cardio and only doing strength training, for most people's goals, I would say only strength training is going to be a good choice. Just because you can still burn calories just with general activity. Walking isn't really cardio. You're not stimulating the cardiovascular system from walking around in most cases, unless you're super out of shape or obese. And you can maintain, retain, gain muscle from strength training, which with cardio, not so much. So I would say for most people, it's worth prioritizing strength training and then adding on cardio on top of that if really necessary. Again, this is for naturals. If you're enhanced, you have such a huge advantage when it comes to maintaining your muscle that cardio might make more sense, just because that's less of a concern for that population. 27, is the just do 10K steps a day a good advice for losing weight? It's okay, it's not necessary. Like, I've averaged 9K steps a day during this diet, cut, whatever, and I seem to have done okay. I'm down 10 kilos. Strength is basically the same. Measurements are down a little bit, but that's mostly fat loss, etc. One guy says here, not quite, 20,000 is a good goal to aim for. That's basically 3 hours of walking per day. So I would say for most people, that is excessive. The highest day I've done so far is 15.5, and there have been some days where I've just been a lazy piece of shit and gotten in none, basically, just staying at home all day. So I would say this is generally good advice, but to think there's something magic about 10K is not accurate or true. And if you're hitting 6 to 8K, if your diet is fine and you're still hitting your weight training, you should absolutely still be able to lose fat. Next one, views on fasting. 3 words. That's very, very general. I think it's fine. I think it's overrated for fat loss. Yes, you're going to lose fat, but you're also at risk for losing muscle, and you're definitely not gaining muscle during that time. I think people say it's like anti-catabolic or it preserves your muscle. No, just because it elevates your growth hormone doesn't mean it preserves muscle, okay? And most people don't need to learn to live without food. They have to learn to live with food. And I've seen it many times where someone fasts, they binge, they gain every single goddamn gram of that fat back and more. So I would say for most people, fasting is not going to be a wonderful way to get to their goals. It might be a way for some people, but it's not my go-to advice for sure. Next one, a really good question. Mental state while cutting. When you are hungry, you get angry easily. I get pissed with small things, and it's like I'm a different person. Do you become moody and easily pissed throughout your cut? If yes, how do you deal with it and be positive during a cut? So yes, I think metacognition, thinking about thinking, like if a TV show references the fact that it's a TV show, it's so meta or something, right? Well, thinking about thinking, metacognition, I think can be very useful. Just realizing you're going to get pissed off and just, deep breaths. If someone steals one of my plates when I'm lifting weights, which happens all the fucking time in China, if I'm not cutting, it's like, come on, man. If I'm cutting, it's like, it's a very different reaction, but I also have to control myself. And you do see guys who are on low carbs, anabolics, very lean, they get pissy a lot more easily. And this, whatever the name of the bodybuilder who got pissed at the guys filming recently, it happens, and you have to have the self-control to just chill the fuck out, especially when you're on, various hormones, which can get you even more pissed off. But even for naturals, if you're on low carbs, yeah, it is very easy to have your mood change quite a bit. And just realize it's going to happen and adjust and realize that it's still your choice. And there's no excuse to being a dick just because you're dieting. Next one, when cutting calories to a deficit, how long does it take for the metabolism to slow down to adapt to the lesser intake of energy? I've heard this used a lot as an excuse, why someone isn't losing weight, but I know it's not as fast as some people say. I'm just curious about the specifics. I haven't actually looked into this, and I don't do research for Q&As. All of it is just already in my head, so you might want to do some Googling and try to find out yourself. But I would say it's not immediate. You talk to some guys, you listen to guys like Jason Fung, they make it seem like the minute you go into a deficit, your metabolism fucking tanks. No, okay? It takes weeks and weeks, if not months. And if someone is not losing weight, they're probably not in a deficit. And it's not because their metabolism adapted, it's because they're probably eating more than they actually think or say. And so, track accurately if you're tracking, don't be delusional, don't blame your metabolism on stuff. This is something I see all the time, and people like V-Shred use it to hook people in, like, oh, boost your fucking metabolism. No, okay, it's not your metabolism that is the issue. In all likelihood, it is you that is the issue. And so take responsibility for your actions. That is going to be much better in the long term than trying to blame something that is not physiologically happening in the majority of cases. All right, 31, is there a somewhat accurate way to track your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, besides counting daily steps? I don't know. I've never seen anything used besides either steps or in a lab they measure your respiration and can actually measure your metabolic rate. But I wouldn't say there's anything that you can actually measure besides steps. You would have to measure your body temperature or your respiration, etc. So I'm going to say no. Can you still build muscle in a deficit? Yes, if it's not an extreme deficit, if you are relatively fatter, if you are a beginner to weight training, if you're on anabolic steroids, and even without those, I think you can still gain muscle in a deficit in some cases in the short term. But long term, probably not going to be the best way to go about things. And again, I just did a video on maingaining. So, if you're in a deficit, that's even harder to gain muscle. And I would say for most people, not going to be the best choice. Next one, are mini cuts, say 2 weeks, better at preserving muscle than an extended cut, say 2 months? So are you talking about the same sized deficit? In that case, the mini cut would be better because it's less time with the same deficit. Or are you talking about the same amount of fat loss? In which case, the 2 months would be better because you're taking it slower, and that tends to maintain your lean body mass much better. So it really depends on how you're defining things. Are you going by the same rate or the same overall amount of fat loss? All right, the next question is kind of an essay. It's like 8 lines long. They're basically asking, how do you tell what deficit you should choose and how much fat loss you should lose per week, depending on what your body fat percentage is. Again, basically, the fatter you are, the higher your body fat percentage, to put it in a PC way, the more fat and the faster the fat rate of loss you can do. And it'll be sort of like an asymptote. If you're super shredded, you're not going to be losing a pound of fat per week. It's just not going to happen. So I think there's a formula online you could, again, get to Googling. But yeah, just keep in mind the more fat you have, the faster you can lose. All right, next question. Hey, great workout plan, by the way. I'm working on sending those vids to you soon. All right, so there's a client who just got actually a workout plan. Well, my question would be about water retention. So as I understand, we can actually retain a lot of water if we have high sodium intake. I personally love salt and probably eat way too much of it. So what can I do to combat the adverse effects of high sodium diet? I'm currently drinking tons of water to counterbalance the possible physique and health damaging effects. But what advice would you give to reduce sodium in your diet besides spices? So I would say, keep in mind it's not high sodium or low sodium, it's the change in sodium. So if you go from low sodium to high sodium, that will make you retain water, especially if you drink a lot of water along with it. So if you drink a lot of water because like, oh my God, I ate a lot of sodium, let me drink some water to flush it out, you'll just retain that water and it'll be worse. It'll maybe help it flush it out sooner, but you'll definitely noticeably retain that water. So I would say keep your sodium consistent. Could be moderate, could be high-ish. I wouldn't go super low sodium. It's actually super important. So, there's no point in like trying to completely cut out sodium. It's actually a lot more important than you think. But I would say just try to aim for consistency. Whether it's like high, moderate, high, like somewhere in that range, don't go all over the place where you have like an MSG Chinese food meal one day and then like chicken breast and broccoli with no sodium at all the next, because your body is not going to know what hits it. You're going to want to be as consistent as possible. All right, next one. How do you go about tapering down cardio steps, etc., after a cut in combination with food increase? I like to do a combination. So I like to increase food, and then I like to increase food first, because let's face it, after a cut, that's probably going to increase anyway. And so you might as well keep the cardio to keep the insulin sensitivity benefits and just keep absorbing all the food that is going to be incoming. So I would like to increase food first. And then as you go up in body fat percentage, especially if it's like post-show when you're super fucking shredded, then later when you're deeper into the off season, then you can reduce cardio more. I think that's better than reducing cardio first and still having to restrict food, because then that's just not a great situation. All right, next one, number 37. Do you think a $50 book with less than 100 pages specified for cutting would be helpful, or is it too expensive? What's your go-to food sources on a cut? All right, so a $50, I assume it's an ebook, maybe it's a book, but that's quite expensive for an ebook. I mean, my book is $15 and it's 200 pages or more. However, I wouldn't go just by the number of pages. I mean, if it's a blank fucking book, or if it's just like a bunch of filler, that's not getting you any value. Plus, I wouldn't go just based on the price. There are a bunch of overpriced things in the world, especially ebooks from certain influencers who might not have your best interests at heart. So I wouldn't go just by the price. Back in the first, exchange with Greg Doucette, one criticism of my book was that it was just $8. People were like, I'm not going to buy your book. It's $8. Of course it's shit. Read the fucking reviews. It's a gold mine. It's a goddamn gold mine. It is one of the best products in fitness, and I 100% stand by that. And even at $15, it's a goddamn steal. And I know this sounds like an advertisement. I've got to eat, brothers. I've got to eat. So I would say don't go too much based on the price. More expensive isn't always better. And then don't go based on page number either, because you'd rather have quality pages rather than just more pages, right? As for go-to food sources, my diet doesn't change that much. I just eat less and I move more. So it's not like I eat completely differently. I still give myself a lot of dietary flexibility and freedom. Freedom! Next question, your opinion on refeed days or eating at maintenance for a few weeks during a cut. So the latter would be more of like a diet break kind of thing. They both have their place. They're actually quite different in my opinion. They're used in very, very different ways. So it's not like one is better than the other, because they're not even apples and oranges. They're totally different. Refeed days, it's just a short break, then you keep losing weight. And you can put those in very, very frequently. Eating at maintenance, that's more after like a 10-week or a 12-week cut where you're kind of messed up in terms of diet fatigue, and you give yourself this longer time, to hormonally get in check and then also to clear your mind. So they're really used for two totally different things, and they're not exchangeable whatsoever, in my opinion. There are different ways to structure it, but they don't really replace each other. Next one, how to cut without trying hard. As a coach, the worst thing I can see on a client questionnaire is if someone wants to lose fat and their diet already looks perfect, which is extremely rare, but occasionally it does happen. So they're eating like a very, very healthy diet, reasonable portion sizes, counting calories. Calories are already pretty low. You'd expect them to be losing weight, and they're like, oh my God, I can't lose weight. Because then as a coach, you're like, well, shit, like you're doing everything I would say to do. But that's not most of the time. Most of the time, their diet is a direct reflection of how they look and vice versa. Okay, so you see someone and they're massively overweight, obese, and their diet sucks. And so it should be pretty easy to cut, because you just cut out the soda and the fast food and the delivery and the obvious bullshit, and they lose weight super fucking easily. So I would say just cut out the obvious bullshit from your diet. Most people have it somewhere. It's extremely rare to see someone who is overweight, over fat, and who has a very, very good diet on paper. So I would say just cut out the stuff that is obviously not good. And usually this is not an education issue. It's actually just doing it. All right, next one. I'm losing muscle, but gaining athletic endurance on my cut. Running distance and pace shot up from 2K and probably forever to 14K in 50 minutes. Nice. Should I start weight training with the same intensity again, or do I wait till my cut is over? It depends on your goals. If you want to maintain and retain your muscle, you should already be weight training. And especially if you notice yourself already losing muscle, what are you doing? If you don't care about muscle, then like you only want to get better at distance running, well then you don't need to weight train. Maybe just a little bit to keep your hips healthy, your knees healthy, to keep a basic level of strength for injury prevention, that kind of thing. So it depends if you want to prioritize running or looking sexy. But I would say the single fastest way to ruin a physique in typical terms is to like stop weight training and just start distance running. You're going to lose a whole bunch of muscle, and so if that's not what you want, don't do that. It doesn't matter if 14K in 50 minutes is very, very good, so you might be talented in that regard. You might want to explore, maybe how fast you can get in that, but you are going to have to sacrifice something somewhere. Next question, how long does it take for the glycogen to completely refill after a diet to get rid of that flat look? A couple of days of solid eating, maybe a week if you are like, oh, I don't know if I should eat this rice. But I would say it might even be one day if you actually put in some work with the fork. But I would say 2 or 3 days of like solid work. It'll probably take And some people's metabolisms, they shoot up so much when you refeed that you really have to eat a fuck ton of food to actually fill out. I've heard stories of like 1,000 grams of carbs still not quite doing it, and you need 1,200, especially for bigger enhanced lifters. Other guys, especially if you already had carbs fairly moderate, you might top off on like 200 or 300 grams and 400 grams somewhere on there, and that can be done in a single sitting if you really get after it. All right, next one, number 42. Is it better to eat fewer calories and do less cardio, or do more cardio and eat more calories, assuming the deficit is the same size? I answered this in a previous question, so just Control F cardio and then see which one is extremely similar to this question, and that will be your answer, because I'm not answering it again. All right, next one. How do you know when to stop cutting? When you want to, like when you get to your goal. If you have a certain body fat rate you're playing in, like 12 to 18%, you get to 12%, you stop cutting, you lean bulk, you go back down, blah 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 blah. If it's a competition, after the competition. If you're getting lean for the summer, after the summer, the final pool party is done, you're back to bulking, that kind of thing. So there's no hard and set answer. It's really up to you and your personal situation. Next question, does protein intake actually make a big difference in keeping muscle on a cut? Sometimes I won't be hungry but have to eat to get my protein in before bed. Sorry, excuse me. And it triggers my appetite, or a burp, and I want to keep eating. It does matter, it does make it a big difference, but it also doesn't matter exactly when you have it. So just eat more earlier in the day. If you're doing intermittent fasting, and you can't get in your protein, and you have to have it before bed, and that impacts your sleep, not a good idea. Or if it triggers your appetite and you eat too much, also not a good idea. So eat more earlier. Simple. All right, next one. How long should you stay on a cut before increasing cardio, reducing calories? Is it better to do a maintenance phase for 2 weeks, then cut again with the same deficit used before? Good question, actually. I prefer personally just to keep hammering away, and if you plateau, just reduce the calories, keep pushing on. But some people prefer to take a maintenance phase, then push on. You might not be able to cut again with the same deficit, or with the same level of calories. You might need to decrease the calories or increase the activity in order to create the same deficit, because your metabolism might go down, which in some ways is unavoidable. You can do some tweaks, changes, but you should expect your calories to slightly go down at least during a cut. What are your thoughts on fasting 48 to 72 hours as one of the tools for fat loss? So I did a video or an answer on this before. Just search fasting in the community tab or in the description. I'm not a huge fan of it. Often it backfires. The thing about fasting is that the people who like fasting tend to love fasting. And it's a little bit like keto. They tend to tell everyone that they're doing fasting and autophagy, and they're fucking, downgrading and upgrading and everything. They're grading everything at the same time, and they're living way, way longer. And it can help in some regards. But in terms of just fat loss, I don't see it being all that much better than just a deficit. You see guys like Jason Fung saying calories don't matter. Yes, they fucking matter, you fucking charlatan, okay? Yes, I'm pissed at that guy because he knows he's full of shit, and yet he just gotta make those book sales, right? So I would say I don't advocate it, but try it gradually to see if it works for you. But it's not something that I really ever use with clients. Next one, how to keep a consistent deficit when working a job where some days you are super active, 25K steps, damn dude, or pretty sedentary, under 7K steps, so my maintenance is all over the place from week to week. I would say you don't have to keep the same deficit. Okay, you can be in a 2,000 calorie deficit some days, not the end of the world, especially if it's a high activity day. You might actually be eating more calories on that day. And then other days, your deficit isn't as big. There's nothing wrong with having an inconsistent deficit. It's the deficit over a week and over a month and a year, etc., that is going to cause the overall change in body weight. So I would say don't worry about this too much. Maybe eat slightly more on your higher activity days. But if you're not hungry on a higher activity day, it's not like you have to force feed either just to keep some arbitrary deficit. If anything, there have been times when I was super active and my hunger went down and I ate less, and I think there's nothing wrong with that as long as you keep protein, at a reasonable level. Question 48, very similar. Do we have to eat the same amount of calories the days we work out and rest days? No, you don't have to keep the same calories or the same deficit, anything like that. Again, this is the deficit over the week that is really going to matter. So if you want to eat more on your workout days, heck, if you want to eat less on your workout days, if you feel better with an empty stomach and you're hungrier on your off days and you want to eat more food on your off days, nothing wrong with that. It can work for some people, but generally speaking, I would say keep more calories on the workout days because most people feel better doing that. Next question, another one about fasting. Again, search fasting for more information in this video on fasting. I guess I'll do a full video as well because it seems like a very popular topic. What's your view on whether fasting is muscle sparing? People say it is, but I don't know on what evidence. So that evidence is typically like it increases your growth hormone, it increases testosterone. That is done by the body in a somewhat futile attempt to retain and maintain lean body mass. But if you're not taking in protein, it's just trying to offset something, and it's not really going to be optimally efficient in my point of view. I would say, if anything, do a protein spared modified fast so that at least you get in protein. But if you look at the top bodybuilders, the guys who really want to have as much muscle as possible and as little fat as possible, naturals or otherwise, very few of them fast. Some of them do intermittent fasting, but how many of them are just not eating a few days per week? Almost none. Okay, so success leaves clues, and if no one at the top level, or basically no one at the top level, correct me if I'm wrong, is doing it, it's probably a dumb idea. Next one, do you recommend aggressive mini cuts for 2 weeks to 2 months, or a slow and steady small caloric deficit to lose weight for people around high teens or low 20s body fat? So a super aggressive 2-month cut is not a mini cut, and I wouldn't even be super aggressive because, a couple weeks, fine. 2 months, muscle, get fucked, basically. So especially if you're high teens, you're somewhat lean already, so it's not like you can really go hard for 2 months. You will almost certainly lose muscle, and your workouts will go to shit as well. So I would say you can be aggressive for 2 weeks and then phase down your deficit as you get leaner, because you're going to get much leaner in those first 2 weeks, and then you won't be able to sustain as big of a deficit. And a mini cut, at least from what I've seen, isn't 2 months. That's just a cut at that point. Next one, when trying to maximize muscle size as a beginner, how long should I keep my lean bulk before trying to lean cut? It almost seems like this is a bulking question. They try to slip it in as a cutting question. It depends. Bulk until you feel embarrassed or shitty about yourself, or you're not willing to pop your shirt off or whatever. Everyone has their time when it's all right, time to cut. If it's 12%, maybe keep going. You have some issues there, but it's not. There's no fixed time. It's not like it's 3 months or 6 months before you have to cut. No, it's best to go by feel. Just lean bulk as slowly as you can, not super slowly, but where you're not gaining a ton of fat either, and then lean cut later when you hit that point, which is going to be different for every single person. So there's not a formula that I have that I use with clients. I actually have to listen to them, and I actually have to read the responses to a questionnaire and give advice based on their personal situation. Imagine that, coaching that is actually coaching. Next question, a little bit of a personal one. I like to lift weights in the evening, and I want to start dedicating time to cardio. Do you recommend doing cardio in the morning before work, school, or after, and make it the last thing I do before bed? Probably morning would be better, but maybe get in some, at least, protein source before you have it. I'm not really a huge fan of fasted cardio. And in fact, protein intake before fasted cardio will increase your fat burning. Hot tip. but I also wouldn't do it right before bed. So I would say morning is better, but you know, it shouldn't be make or break. If you have to do cardio to lose fat, you're better off re-examining your diet instead. Next one, mini cuts and mini bulks, worth it and healthy. I would say they're worth it, but don't overdo it. I see some people, it's like every month they're doing something different. It's like, oh, I'm cutting, I'm bulking, I'm cutting, I'm bulking. This can work for enhanced lifters because when you bulk hard, you gain a fuck ton of muscle because you're enhanced. And then when you cut, you keep all your muscle because you're enhanced. Whereas if you're natural, this kind of bullshit doesn't work as well as like this kind of thing. So I would say mini cuts are fine. Mini bulks, I don't really see the point in that. You know, if you're going to lean bulk, give yourself a nice long runway where you can actually generate momentum and put on a good deal of lean tissue. Mini bulking, mini cutting, I think that's a good way to spin your wheels. Next one, how should my training differ / be adjusted to account for the limited amount of calories? Should I continue with highly fatiguing exercises like the deadlift with lower rep ranges, even though my recovery will be limited? Or should I consider higher rep sets with isolation exercises to protect the integrity of the joints, tendons, etc.? So you have to realize that, especially on some exercises, you might lose strength. And being super stubborn about like keeping your strength, especially when you're losing a lot of fat, a lot of weight, it might end up injuring you because you're just like, no, I must maintain this 220 kilo deadlift, even though like you feel like shit that day because your calories are low and like only 210 is in the cards. Nothing wrong with lifting 210. Okay, when your calories are up later and you feel better again, the strength comes back really quickly. But if you like absolutely try to maintain a certain level of performance, you could snap your shit up or run into overuse injuries. You should try to maintain your strength as best you can, but realize, you know, there's a little bit of ebb and flow to training. And when you're cutting, that ebb and flow, the specific loads might not always be there. And so, yeah, higher reps might be better, maybe a little bit more isolation. But overall, your training should not be wildly different just because you're cutting. All right, next question. Do you have any good tips on how to cut up a mango or other fruits and vegetables you might find difficult to cut? It is a cutting Q&A, and so a lot of the questions were off topic. They're like, how do I bulk? Or does the bench press work my brachioradialis? Come on, it's a cutting Q&A. This is a damn good cutting question. I would say keep your knife sharp. You know, listen to Gordon Ramsay, not some other idiot chefs, right? Nothing wrong with a sharp knife. Nothing wrong with keeping your knives sharp, ready for the task at hand. I would say chainsaw is a good option, but maybe only do it outside. You can really get a lot of splatterage. Keep your fingers really close to the chainsaw as well. Live dangerously. What's the worst that can happen? Next one, if your daily maintenance is kind of low for a man at 2200, is it okay to cut calories, or should I only increase NEAT and start doing cardio for the duration of the whole cut? Yeah, 2200 is pretty low for a maintenance, so I would say you can go below 2200. You know, Arnold cut on like 1600 or something. I made that up, but I heard it somewhere. You know, most guys will need to go below 2000 to get shredded as a natural. You know, Menno Henselmans was talking about how 2000 didn't get him anywhere, and then 1800, I think, was like his number that he needs to get fucking peeled. So there's nothing wrong with going below 2200. Some people are like, it's unhealthy to go below 2000. Long term, like very long term maybe, but if it's what you have to do, you know, I would say increase your cardio / NEAT. NEAT would be the best way, just more walking. That would be the best way to go, but if you have to reduce your calories below 2200, completely fine as well. Next question, approximately how many calories would you say are burned, oxidized, whatever, per hour of lifting? I know it varies, but maybe just give me an average figure. So it depends on how big you are, what kind of workout is. If you're an average guy in the gym and you're doing like an arm workout, you're not burning hundreds of calories, okay? Like a 45-minute arm day, 100 calories, 150. Even if it's a full body hour and a half workout, odds are it's a few hundred, like 400, 500 maybe, if you're enhanced and you're just like, Brian Shaw doing a 2-hour workout, that might be close to 1,000, somewhere between 500 and 1,000, I would say. But don't overestimate it. So many people are like, I definitely burned 1,000 calories. I earned a Big Mac and a Whopper, surprise. Probably not. Next question, what is the best way to get into calorie counting, especially if you cook meals for 2 people and don't eat just chicken, broccoli, rice diet? Don't do that. It's tough. Well, if you cook, you can measure the stuff you're putting in there, so that's good. If you're eating at restaurants, have fun. Not easy at all, because you have no idea what the fuck they're putting in there. Even if you look it up online, you still have no idea. Okay, you think Chipotle is like standardizing how much mayo they splurge into your burrito? No. Okay, it's that dude. He's like, I'm feeling generous. This person is lean. They need to get fucked on their diet. Like, here's an extra 800 calories of mayo. You think it's a 400 calorie burrito? Haha, nope. So I would say, measure the individual components. If it's something that's like, it's a single ingredient thing, like 100 grams of diced onions, that's pretty accurate generally. But if it's not, that's where it becomes a little bit tricky. Food labels also not as accurate as people think. But generally speaking, it's going to average out. Whatever you do, make sure you're consistent. If you're inaccurate, but you're consistently inaccurate, like you just don't count green vegetables, then that's okay, because like you never count green vegetables, therefore whatever deficit or surplus you create is in comparison to what you think you're eating. It doesn't necessarily need to be to the gram, it just needs to be in comparison to what actually changes your body weight. Next one, amount of protein required to prevent loss of muscle or strength during a caloric deficit, or as much as possible. I would say 1.6 grams per kilo, or roughly 0.8 grams per pound. You can go a little bit higher than that, but I don't think it's night and day. You see these people who are just eating stupid amounts of protein, like 400 grams of protein per day, and I've done that. That was like some stuff I did in my first couple of years of training, where I was just like, I'm going to eat 8 chicken breasts per day. Not even joking. But I would say, around a gram per pound or just under should be okay. Next one, is it easier to be more shredded when you have more muscle mass? Quite an interesting topic, because muscle mass raises your BMR, of course, but on the other hand, more muscle equals bigger the demand to keep it, increased appetite, etc. So yeah, you do see people who can maintain a pretty damn lean physique with like very, very little muscle. And then you see a lot of people with, not a lot of people, but you see people with a shit ton of muscle who have trouble staying lean. The permabulkers, strongmen kind of people. So I would say there's less correlation than you think. It has more to do with your diet, hormone levels. Having more muscle might help a bit, but if someone wants to maintain only a lean physique, like that's their only thing, they want to be lean, getting more muscle mass is not going to be as much of a game changer as a lot of people think. Oh, Jeffrey, my Jeffrey. In which situations would you recommend recomping as opposed to going straight for a fat loss diet? Depends if you're comfortable with your current body fat percentage. If you're 18% and you don't really care to be leaner, nothing wrong with recomping, and you can probably recomp for quite a long time. Same thing with 22%. It just depends. Mostly on your body fat percentage and then on your personal preferences as well. Next one, if your legs are already big from being fat and you have chub rub, is it okay to do squats and deadlifts while cutting? Will my legs reduce in size and be more fat and muscle if I'm in a caloric deficit while doing squats and deadlifts? So if you're in a caloric deficit, you're going to be losing fat. And if you're already getting that chub rub from being fat, I would say squats and deadlifts are the least of your worries. And if you gain muscle, probably won't be all that big of an issue. I get adductor chafage even when my quads are fucking diced, like absolutely feathered, and I'll still get that sometimes, especially if I do a lot of walking. But in your case, it sounds like that is more of a fat rubbage kind of situation. So I wouldn't worry about squats and deadlifts at all. That's not the issue here. Next one. Hey man, I've been binge watching your content lately. My problem is I live with my family. Sucks to hear. Sucks to hear that. Damn. And they eat mostly fast food. When I get hungry, I crave for the food too much and feel bad. I'm literally addicted to sugar and eating crap food that has so many calories and no nutritional value. How can I stop this? I'm going to assume you're on the younger side if you're still living with your family. If not, make some money and move the fuck out would be my advice. But yeah, there's no real good solution there. Try to load up on healthy foods whenever you can, especially before a meal. Even something like having a casein protein shake before dinner can blunt your appetite and make it easier to make good decisions. But that's not easy. You know, that's definitely not a good situation. And it's one of those things where misery loves company, and especially if you've been brought up in that environment, it can be very, very difficult to make changes. So, you know, just do the best you can, and you know, if you're addicted to sugar, that's a tricky situation. I would say go cold turkey. You know, it might have to be done. Maybe just talk to your family. Just say like, hey, I'm doing this for my health. This is what I want to do. And especially if you can provide for your own meals potentially, they should be able to accept that. Because especially if they're eating fast food, it's not like you're rejecting your mother's home cooking, okay? You're rejecting the bullshit that they're trying to give you. Next question, should you change your lifting program / routine as well during a cut? How much less should you eat, aka how big of a caloric deficit is reasonable? I would say 500 is a good starting place for the deficit. And if you have more fat to lose and you're okay with suffering a little bit, you might want to go a little bit above 500, perhaps as much as 1,000. I've had some clients go for the 1,000 calorie per day deficit and do very, very well and keep the weight off. So it can work, but it's definitely not for everyone. As far as your lifting routine, I think a lot of people try to increase their weight training volume, but that just means you were sandbagging before. Like if you bulked up and now you're cutting and you're increasing your volume, what the fuck were you doing before? You know, where you were basically just sandbagging because you should be able to have more volume and recover from more volume when you are eating more food. So realize that your volume might have to go down slightly when you're cutting, but it shouldn't be drastic. Perhaps, you know, take out 10 or 20% of your volume and just monitor it and see how well you can recover. And then by the end of the cut, if you're getting very, very lean, you might be down to like half to 2/3 of your original volume, which you can increase later once your calories are back up a little bit. All right, here are a few questions in a row from the same guy. How long should you cut for? As long as needed to get to your goals, basically. Are mini cuts good? I did a few other answers on mini cuts. Again, you can search away. Yeah, they're fine. I think they're a good way to set things up. Slow bulk, relatively fast mini cut, and just keep doing that and getting those gains. How many pounds should you lose on a cut per week? Again, it's very individual. I would say 1 to 2 pounds per week is a good range for most people. As you get leaner, you might want to go towards closer to half a pound. Also realize the first week of any cut, you're going to lose significant amounts of water and then also just intestinal bulk, which sounds gross and is gross. Next one, how to maintain as much muscle as possible during a cut. Again, I addressed this in other places, blah, blah, blah. But keep protein high. Don't dump your fats super low. Keep your carbs around the workout. Make sure your sleep is fine. Keep lifting as heavy as is reasonably possible. Don't tank your volume. Keep that as high as you can within the realm of being reasonable. And keep trying to gain strength if you can. Can you address caffeine addictions? Increasing while cutting and how to come off it with minimal withdrawals. You can taper it down. I never do. I just keep it high all the time. I don't think there's anything really wrong with habitual caffeine addiction. Intake. Or you can just go cold turkey. I've done that before, which sucks a lot, especially because I have a lot of it all the time. But both are fine. Ideally, you would cycle it, but I just enjoy a daily coffee or 4, 5, 6. So I would say this is sort of a non-concern. Both ways can work, but if you go cold turkey, especially if you've been having it a lot, be prepared for a little bit of suffering. All right, next one. This is sort of a 3-parter. What is it about weight training that causes a higher resting metabolism? So part of it is you just have more mass to sustain and maintain. It's not like it just, if you don't have blood flow and energy to it dies. Necrosis, which is not what you want typically. Also, it does take energy to recover and to repair, and this can be significant, especially if you're doing full body, lower body, heavy, hard, damaging movements. If your body is a house and a fucking tornado comes and rips a good chunk of your wall down, it takes energy to fucking repair it. It's the same thing with weight training. So it's not massive by any means. Like, this should not be thousands of calories per day, but it is significant and it does add up over time. And I think weight training is one of the best tools that you have for losing fat. Because again, you maintain your muscle and you're burning more muscle or burning more fat every time you stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Okay? It's been shown that people who weight train with the same amount of calories, they lose more fat. And it's not even close. That's how good it is. Number 2, losing muscle mass may be a necessary part of a long cut. How do you get over this? Go slow, especially as you get leaner. Keep your protein high. All the stuff I've been saying a bunch of times. Sufficient fats, carbs around the workout, sleep, good training, etc. Number 3, when are you going to tell Emily Blunt that you're also married to a woman in China? Well, it's been tricky. I've been living a double life. Movie premiere lately. It's been tough, man. It's been really, really tough since my time at the office. All right, number 71. Does my body fat set point change as I remain outside of it? Does being shredded get easier over time? Does remaining at a high body fat percentage make it harder to lose weight later? I would say yes. This is anecdotal, pure anecdote, no studies here. But, you do see long-term natural bodybuilders finding it easier to maintain a leaner physique the more they do it. And this could be just adherence. You also do see them be able to eat more calories / carbs over time and still maintain a pretty lean physique in some cases, even naturally, I think, in a lot of cases. So I would say yes. Plus, you do see people, if they've always been fat, like their whole life they've been 35-40% body fat, it is tricky. Like, I've had clients come to me, literally 40% body fat, and tell me their goal is 5 to 9% body fat. And that happens so goddamn rarely, where you see even someone who has always been lean maintain that type of physique, yet let alone someone who has been very overweight their whole life. So realistically, if you've always been fairly fat, I would say for a man, low 20s is a damn good job. So, don't think like you're going to be able to maintain this otherworldly fitness model physique when you've always been on the thicker side. It's just not really going to happen in the vast majority of cases. I know that sounds pessimistic, but it's also damn true. Next one, is it really necessary to eat 2 grams per pound of body weight of protein? Get fucked kidneys? I'm just kidding. It's not. Actually, it's not a kidney thing at all. Complete myth. Don't take that out of context, goddammit. Geoff said protein fucks your kidneys. To prevent muscle loss, or is that overblown? Yeah, that's very overblown. That's as overblown as Clinton. And getting a reasonable amount of something like 0.8 to 1 gram, enough. Yeah, that's plenty. Okay, 1 gram per pound is plenty. Okay, I would say no one really needs more than that. assuming you're natural. If you're enhanced, you can use more, therefore take in more. But if you're natural, no need at all. Next one, how much strength should you expect to lose when you go from, say, 15% to 10% body fat? So I would say this depends on how advanced you are. If you're a world-class powerlifter and you're 15% and you go down to 10%, you'll probably lose some strength, particularly if you're natural. Most naturals won't be as strong at 10% compared to 15%. Hormones, leverages, just diet, water retention, joint structural integrity, etc. I would say 5 to 10% though. It's not going to be like you lose half your strength or anything. I would say 5 to 10%. You'll also notice that some lifts tank more than others. Bench press often goes down quite a bit. I find that my squat takes a much bigger hit than my deadlift. When I'm like thick boy 20% mode, my squat depth will be higher than when I'm dieted down, just because I'll have more thickness around the hips, the knees, the belly area, and therefore my ass to grass is like parallel. Whereas when I'm dieted down, there's nothing to stop me just going down below parallel. Therefore, I will keep going, and this will impact my strength because leverages are worse when you're deeper, and you'll just have more range of motion. Therefore, you'll be weaker. Next one, how to know what a given body fat percentage looks like. Is there a specific way to tell? Yes, I did a full video on this. Just search like body fat percentage, or I think it was like Greg Doucette laser eyes, which I actually think his laser eyes were very much on point that time. Not every time, but in that video, he was quite accurate. Next one, hey coach, what do you think about high fat diets? Are they good for maintaining weight and strength? Thanks. They can work, especially if you stick with them and you're like actually in ketosis. If you're like pussyfooting around low carb and you're like low enough carb that it sucks, but not low enough that you are actually in ketosis, probably not a great idea. But once you're in ketosis, appetite goes down, hunger goes down. It's actually, protein sparing, etc. And so that can work pretty well for some people. Not everyone. Like if ketosis works really well for some people, but for a lot of people, it's just a complete shit fest. So I would say if you're the kind of person who ketosis, a keto diet works really well for, go for it, stick with it, make it a lifestyle, etc. But if you feel like shit on ketosis, on a ketogenic diet, don't feel like it's something you have to do for really any goal whatsoever. There's very little that ketogenic diet is actually like significantly better for. The only thing it might be better for is appetite reduction, and a lot of people don't even feel that. Next one, how much do hormonal factors affect weight loss or fat loss? Is insulin sensitivity, etc., overrated? I would say yes. Calories are the main driver of fat loss. Okay? Say it with me. Calories are the main driver of fat loss. It's just an absolute fucking fact at this point. There are hundreds of studies at this goddamn point. And so if someone is like, insulin, every fucking sentence is about insulin, they are not lying because it does have an impact, but they're being very disingenuous because you can have a high insulin diet and still lose a shit ton of weight. You could have a low insulin diet and gain weight if it's a lot of fat. So it does affect fat loss, especially if you're diabetic, but I would say for most people it's not going to be the main focus. Some people disagree with me on this. Leave your nasty comment. I'm not going to reply just because I'm actually a really fucking busy person, and there's no way I can convince you anyway. So get to Googling, do your goddamn research, and realize that in this case, you're not necessarily wrong, but you're probably misguided. I've heard a lot of people say diet breaks are a good way of mitigating metabolic adaptations that stop you from burning as much energy. Would you consider diet breaks a good tool to implement, or is it a waste of time? So I think it's not so much the metabolic adaptations, but it's adherence, as well as, and Geoff Nippard mentioned this in his recent video, it helps you practice eating at maintenance. I've met people who have never eaten at maintenance. Ever. They've always been bulking or cutting, but they've never actually practiced eating to maintain their body weight or recomping or whatever. It's always a bulk or a cut, and I think this is a very useful skill. Are diet breaks useful? Yes, and they're definitely not a waste of time. But on the other hand, if you diet for 2 weeks and you're like, oh fuck, I need a diet break, that's a good way to really slow down the process to the point where you might not ever get to your goals, because you're always maintaining, even though you should be more aggressive with the diet. Again, this is pretty individual. Some clients I really push harder because I know that it's best for them. Other people, I'm like, all right, you've hit this certain number, let's maintain this, and then in a couple weeks, let's try to attack the next 5 or 10 pounds, something like that. So it is pretty individual, and there's no one size fits all. Same like clothing or condoms. All right, next one. If you are fairly lean, around 13% body fat, is it better to do a slow bulk for the first few years of training? So I guess you're a beginner, maybe? Or is it more beneficial to do bulks and cuts? Bulk as slowly as you can to minimize fat gain. So I'm not saying bulk as slowly as possible so you can like barely see the scale moving, but you want to do it in a way that the majority of tissue gained is muscle. And this can be a very fine line to walk. It can be very difficult. You know, try to be as disciplined as you can during your bulks as well as your cuts. But you might, over the course of a few years, you might have to do some cuts. Just because if you try to do it all in one bulk, it might be so slow that you limit your muscle growth. On the other hand, if you're like bulk up, bulk up, bulk up, bulk up, bulk up, that's also inefficient because you're getting more fat than is necessary in the bulks, and so you're having to cut more frequently than is really needed. This can be just as much art as science, but you know, I would say for a few years you're looking at least a few bulk and cut cycles. But if it's like 10 bulk and cut cycles, you're probably fucking something up somewhere. All right, next one. Damn, look at that upper chest. If I overeat 1,000 calories and run that 1,000 calories the day after, is it all good? All good for what? Like for fat loss? I mean, kind of, but so your glycogen restores are full. It also depends on what you ate. Like, was it pure fat? Because it's possible that if you eat pure fat, you store it as fat, then the next day run is just mostly glycogen, and so you get in the situation where your glycogen is depleted, but the fat already went to fat, and so now you look soft because your glycogen is fucking low, and you look fatter because you have 1,000 extra calories of fat on you, which you probably can't even see. But so it sort of depends. I would not take this mentality. It can be very dangerous where you overeat, you try to cardio the fuck out of it to try to rip that off of you, but it doesn't actually work as well as you think. Because again, where that energy goes is very, very important. If anything, you're going to want to put the activity before, okay? Or if you put the food before, put it right before. If you put in 1,000 calories of work and then you go and work out right afterwards, that's a bunch of insulin and carbs and you know, spikage going your way. You have a fucking sick workout. The fat storage is minimized, especially if it's carbs, and you're all good. Like, you store very little of it because it was around the workout. But if it's the day before, that doesn't work very well because the insulin's already passed, the carbs or the fats are already stored, and it just isn't all that great of a situation. All right, next one. Do macronutrients other than matter protein matter? All right. If yes, what is a general ratio in which we have them? Super individual, but I would say yes, they do matter. You know, anyone who's like protein and calories, not so much. Okay, like fats and carbs are two very distinctly different molecules, and they impact the body very differently. Yes, they are both used as energy. That's about the extent of the similarities. Okay, like they can be they're stored in very different areas. They impact performance very differently. like water retention, just very, very different. I did a video on carbs versus fats. I will not link that up above. You can search for it yourself if you want to indulge in that fine video. But there's no general ratio. It's going to depend on how you want to set things up. Experiment with the ratios. It's not even about the ratio. It's more about the absolute number. You know, your body isn't going to be in ketosis or not in ketosis or whatever just because you have a certain ratio that you're in. And when you hear about a diet, it's like, hey, have you heard about the 40-30-30 diet? No, fuck off. There's nothing magic about a certain ratio. It's more about the calories and then the absolute number of the macronutrients and then the food choices and timing, etc. Not about some certain ratio. All right, number 81. Since smaller people burn a lot less calories during cardio than larger people, should we be doing even more cardio? No, just accept the fact that you're not going to lose fat or weight or whatever or gain at the same rate as someone who is bigger. But since you're smaller, a smaller amount of difference is going to make still a meaningful change. You know, I've heard professional bodybuilders being in a 2,000 calorie per day deficit. Odds are that might be your total maintenance, if not higher. And so, you know, your surplus or deficit or how many calories you burn per cardio or per session or whatever, it's going to be individual, and you shouldn't compare yourself to other people thinking like, well, Thor said he was in a 3,000 calorie deficit or whatever, therefore I need to be too. No, okay, it's going to be super individual. All right, should you start with a cut when you are returning to workouts after a while? If you got fat, yeah. But if you didn't, no, I guess. Like, depends on how your COVID situation went. If you put on a significant amount of weight, yeah, you probably want to start with a cut. Like, if you're 30% body fat, a cut is probably in order. If you are 10% and you lost muscle, don't fucking cut. You know, like if you went to distance running during COVID because the gyms were closed and now you're fucking diced but you lost muscle, well, I would say more of a bulk, lean bulk, whatever, is going to be the best choice. So it depends on your body fat percentage and your personal situation as well as your preferences. Next one, how do you adjust your training volume when cutting? I'm well aware of the 1/3 rule. I'm not, but would like to know what you do for you and your customers. I answered this earlier. I forget which question. Again, search. You should be able to find it. But it does go down most of the time. When you hear people doing more volume when they're cutting, this is usually enhanced lifters who increase their cycles when they are cutting in order to get shredded. Some bodybuilders increase their body weight into a fucking show. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me or like any other natural. Like, you're so anabolic, you recomp, not even recomp because you're not losing weight or gaining weight. You're gaining weight and losing fat and gaining shit tons of muscle into a bodybuilding show. And in that situation, yeah, because you're taking more steroids during a prep, it might make sense to do more volume in order to maximize your cycle. But for naturals, I would say your volume is naturally going to go down a little bit, assuming you were training properly during your bulk or maintenance or whatever was before the cut. Next one, question number 84, should be question 69. If I have sex twice a day, lasting at least 3 to 5 minutes each session, are you timing it? Is at least 3 to 5 minutes? Well, shouldn't you say at least 3 minutes? Anyway, whoa, I'm overanalyzing this already. Each session, would this count as low intensity steady state or high intensity interval training, and exile me from running or biking that day? P.S. Biking or running on flat level terrain, no hills. That was the clarification that I needed for this question, not the first part. Well, it depends on your position, I guess. Like, if you're really getting after it, that might be high intensity cardio. I would check your heart rate on this one as well. You're already checking the time. You might as well strap on a heart rate monitor and check the situation to actually determine what kind of cardio it is. Either way, I would say you're still good for the running and biking, as long as it doesn't make you lazy and sleepy, which it does for some people. Other people, it energizes them, and it might actually be a good performance enhancer. So I would say it's individual, but it probably won't impact things as much as you think. Next one, how effective or realistic is maingaining really if you have been training for, say, a decade as a natty? I would say actually the longer you've been training, the less muscle you're going to gain, the rate is going to be lower, therefore maingaining actually makes more sense. The main issue I have with maingaining is beginners or intermediates, relatively undeveloped skinny twigs who are like, I need to maintain my abs even though I'm fucking skinny. No, okay, if you want to actually develop your physique, you got to let go of your abs. But once you're more advanced, if you've actually been training like fairly optimally for a decade, you should be pretty fucking jacked. Therefore, your rate is going to be lower. Therefore, it actually makes more sense to possibly maingain. All right, next question. Gyms open up on June 9th, so a week and a little bit. Because of the long layoff, it's prime time for newbie gains. Should you use it to cut and try a recomp, or as a muscle building gain phase with a surplus? So again, I answered this a little bit earlier, something very similar. I would say, again, it depends on your body fat percentage. If you blew up, like you now have a belly, a bulk is probably not a great idea for most people's goals or health, etc. If you're fairly lean, don't try to recomp. Like take advantage of these newbie gains, or at least how fresh and sensitive you are to training, and you can take a lean-ish bulk. One, thoughts on compensation mechanisms in response to a physical activity and a restriction of energy intake. There is emerging literature on the fact that our bodies are remarkably reluctant to up the energy expenditure. Yep, I've read that stuff. How to deal with this: up the cardio or restrict more food, since you can't really outrun your diet. Yeah, so I've actually seen that research, and it makes sense. Like, you go do cardio and then you're lazy later in the day. I think most people experience this. I'll have a video on how you can outrun a bad diet to a certain extent. If your diet is truly awful, it's not going to work. Like, you can earn yourself a bit more food or some indulgences for sure. But yeah, trying to outrun a bad diet, like a truly bad high volume diet, isn't going to work very well. And just adding cardio, you see these cardio bunnies at the gym, all they do is cardio, and they look all the same all the fucking time, and they have belly fat from the cortisol, and like, it just doesn't work very well. So I would say weight training, keep your caloric deficit consistent, and make sure that you're not overdoing the cardio, and just generally being active throughout the day. All right, next one, another fasting question. What do you think about prolonged fasting for cutting? Does it preserve muscle as well as people say? If so, would you do it? I have done it, and I think it's still overrated. It's not like some spiritual fucking experience. It's just like not eating. Okay, there's nothing magic about not eating. Yeah, you get autophagy, like you burn fat, but you can still burn fat just having a normal caloric deficit. Again, check the other answers I gave, especially the first one where I went into more detail. But I would say you have to learn to live with food, not without food. That's the vast majority of people. The modern foodal landscape is just an absolute fucking minefield. And so I think just not eating is not usually the answer. Hello, Geoff. Hope you're doing well. I just wanted to let you know that you are my favorite fitness YouTuber along with RP. Thank you. If I'm in a caloric deficit but still managing to progressively overload with all my major movements, will I, 1, feels like a test, continue to gain muscle? And if 1 is a yes, fucking multiple choice, will the rate of muscle growth be equivalent to the muscle growth during a bulk or maintenance, considering that the rate of progression is the same? All right, so I would say, let me get the chest striations going. I would say that for an individual, strength, especially for reps on the relevant exercises, is going to be a very, very good indicator for muscular size in those areas. So, if you get stronger at a squat, especially, high bar, 4 reps, multiple sets, your legs will probably get bigger, okay? And if you gain the same amount of strength in a bulk, or the same amount of strength in a recomp, or the same amount of strength in a cut, I don't see why there would be a huge difference. You could make the argument that more of the strength will be neurological in a cut because your body would rather prioritize that because it's less energy to use. Not sure if there's any actual evidence for that. It'll be easier to increase your strength in a surplus for sure, but I don't see that being in a surplus, maintenance, or deficit is going to magically change that link between strength and size. Again, for an individual, those are very, very linked. So I don't see really anything breaking that link. Next one is losing body fat, somewhat related to joint pain. My knee and elbow joint have suddenly started to pain during full ROM tricep extensions and astrogras squats after I've shed some fat. So again, you do have this padding around the joint when you are a higher body fat percentage. And if you look at a lot of bodybuilders that tear muscles, a lot of it is pre-contest. Dorian Yates tore his biceps, maybe triceps as well. Like pec tears, a lot of it happens when you're very lean, dehydrated, depleted, you have just less energy coming into the system. Maybe you are deficient in some micronutrients, etc. So, plus again, you can just get more range of motion in a certain area, which could tax the joint in a position that you're not really used to, because when you were in thick boy mode, you couldn't even get into that position. So it's possible that your ass to grass is closer to the grass when you're leaner, and that could be causing some issues. So I would go by feel. Generally speaking, for joint pain, control the eccentric, slight pause, explosive yet controlled concentric, and try to keep your technique as consistent as possible. And then again, if you are cutting, you might have to reduce the volume slightly, and you might have to play around with your exercise selection as well, perhaps have a little bit more variation in order to compensate with this extra joint stress. What are your thoughts on CrossFit? Fuck CrossFit. And fuck people who do CrossFit. I'm just kidding. Next one, what, if any, are your preferences in regards to meal timing and macro ratios when cutting? And if they differ from when you're maintaining or bulking, what are the differences? So I take a very loose approach to life as well as cutting and basically everything. The answer to happiness is just not giving a shit about most things in your life. And calories, macros are one of those things. I don't track macros anymore, or calories, or protein, or any of that stuff. I just try to get in a few protein feedings per day, carbs around my workouts, eat fairly flexibly, stick to reasonably healthy foods most of the time, not feel bad about my cheat meals, that kind of thing. And without any exaggeration, I put more thought into a client diet plan than my own diet plan, because right now it's almost entirely instinctive, whereas with a client, I can't exactly say to the client oh yeah, just eat instinctively. Yeah, that's my advice as a coach. Just fuck off, go eat instinctively. That's the solution for everyone. No, I have to give them a lot more guidance in terms of meal timing and macros, and then potentially ratios, but more just the absolute numbers that I want them to hit, etc. The training, etc. So for me, I have a lot less structure than I would advise other people having. Question number 92, really powering through these. Can you be lean and strong? Those are both kind of vague, how lean is lean, how strong is strong. You won't be at your strongest when you're at your leanest. That is for damn certain. And so there is sort of an inverse relationship there. On the other hand, you can be reasonably strong. You don't have to use fucking fake weights just because you're lean. You can be strong enough to where it's not an issue in your daily life and you are still lifting like a decent amount of weight. It just depends on your preferences. Do you want to, go the athlete route and just be fucking diced all the time, even though, it impacts your strength and perhaps your long-term progress? Or do you want to prioritize strength and just, say fuck leanness and I'm only interested in that side of things? Or do you want a little bit of both worlds and sort of combine the two, realizing that you're not going to optimize either by taking that middle route? So it really is up to you. Should I eat anything before working out, like carbs, divine protein shake? How did that word get in there? I heard that if you work out on an empty stomach, you'll lose more fat. I mean, you will transiently in the short term because you have less energy and therefore your body will draw from your fat stores. But this also has a cost, and it's not like this helps your long-term fat loss significantly. It's more about the overall calories. And so I prefer just to plus for a lot of people, it tanks their performance. For every person who's like, I feel great training fasted for 3 hours, there's another person who's like, I can barely move or think. So I prefer to have large amounts of liquid carbs when I train. And I notice that it does impact my work capacity to the point where it actually is probably a net benefit for fat loss, even if I increase my calories at that time. I'll just cut them out in the morning or in the evening and keep my afternoon fucking power carb hour around the workout, and that seems to work best. Next one, does fasted cardio yield results when it comes to improving one's insulin resistance? I don't know. I mean, it's better than nothing, but is it better than non-fasted cardio? Maybe. Like it depends on when you mean the insulin resistance. A lot of what helps the insulin resistance is depleting your glycogen and giving a place for those carbs to go. So you eat the carbs and insulin pushes the carbs out of the bloodstream. It's easier to push those carbs out of the bloodstream, aka making you more insulin sensitive and less insulin resistant, if there's a place for those carbs to be pushed. And that is namely the liver and the muscle. So if those are slightly depleted because of that fasted cardio, yeah, it'll improve your short-term insulin resistance. Will it improve long-term insulin resistance? Maybe. That's where I'm not entirely sure, and you would probably be best off getting to Googling. I would say plausibly. Like, it's almost like a negative feedback loop. The longer that goddamn glucose is in your bloodstream, the more insulin it takes to get it out, and therefore the longer it takes out, and the more you might be impacting your insulin resistance / sensitivity in the future. So I would say it's not necessary. It's more about diet. Like, it'll help you dispose of more glucose, but just eat less glucose. Again, you can't outrun an 800 grams per day carb diet in most cases. Like, there's just no way to do that much activity to actually get it out of the bloodstream without just being absolutely tanked from that much goddamn activity. All right, next one. When I first started lifting, I tried to cut for literally a year. I started at 155 and probably 25% body fat. The lowest I got was, according to my scale, 14%. I still looked like shit and felt hungry constantly. I was told to gain some muscle and try again, that because I have more muscle will be easier. Yeah, maybe. That I wouldn't have to restrict my calories so much. Yes, probably. It's because of this bad experience that I've started to think I just don't have the genetics to be lean. Is there any truth to this? Nothing wrong with 14%, and especially as you get more muscle, you'll look better at 14%. If you have no muscle, you might not feel great at 14%. If you say you look like shit, I'm guessing you were maybe a little higher than 14%, but I'm not entirely sure because some scales are okay, some are horrible. But I would say, try again when you have more muscle. It'll be easier to get leaner, and you'll look better even at the same body fat percentage. If you have a lot of muscle, you'll look like a fucking tank at 14%. And if you have if you're near your genetic limit, like you've been training very, very well for a decade or so, and you're 20% body fat, you'll still look fucking good, okay? Whereas if you have no muscle, you look skinny fat at 20%. So more muscle makes you look leaner, even at the same body fat percentage. So don't give up on leanness, but also don't think that you have to get super lean. If you focus on gaining muscle, you recomp or lean bulk, you will look better in the future. I fucking guarantee you that. I can't guarantee you'll get super lean because part of it is genetic, but I can guarantee you will look better in the future if you gain the muscle. Next one, if you do hypertrophy training and you eat 4 meals with at least 20 grams of protein while doing long distance running on a cut, will you lose muscle? Depends, you know? There's a lot of hormonal issues, it's individual. Depends how good your hypertrophy training is. You know, a lot of people don't optimize their training program, and thus they lose muscle when they could gain muscle with an optimal program. I write custom plans. As for 4 meals with 20 grams of protein, you might want to bump that up a little bit, but, you know, maybe 30 grams would be better, but like 20 grams is still okay. If it's like a vegan 20 grams, I'm gonna get so much hate for that, but if it's like a vegan 20 grams, low in leucine, you know, maybe not as good as a higher quality protein. So yeah, there's a lot of factors there, and it's really hard to say. All right, next one, really good question. When cutting, it's difficult to recognize when you should tear away from a deficit and get back to making progress. Just a little bit leaner, bro, and I'll be happy. Everyone's been there, at least a lot of people have been there. How do you know when it's time to stop a cut? So either when you reach your goal in terms of body fat percentage, you know, maybe you give yourself a long-term 12 to 18% window, 14 to 20%, 10 to 20%. Just depends on how long you want that runway to be, how long you want your bulks to be, how long you want your cuts to be, and how big that window you want to play in. So if you get to the bottom of your window, boom, your cut's over, you go back to bulking, you have a very sort of predetermined area. Or when you start feeling like it's shitty and it's work, and you know, you mini cut until things slow down, you plateau, your food is lower than you want it to be, you're thinking about food more than you probably should, that's usually a sign that you can either maintain, main gain if you're already pretty advanced, or go back to lean bulking if you still want to gain muscle at an appreciable rate. But yeah, it's going to be personal preference as well as going by feel. If you haven't hit like the leanness you want, but it's getting really slow and feeling shitty, you might want to cut it short. On the other hand, if you reach the bottom of your window, let's say your window is 12 to 18%, you reach 12% and you're like, I still feel completely fine, which does happen to some people. You can keep going lower. You can go down to like 10%, 9%, 8%. It just gives you more of a window later. Plus, you know, it's always cool being lean if it's not a lot of work. But when it starts becoming work and just shitty, that's when it's probably best to pull the plug. Not a butt plug, just a metaphorical plug. All right, next one, a multi-question question. How not to rebound after a cut? Go slow, high protein, don't go excessive with the cardio, have a plan, count your calories if you really need to. Don't plan a fucking honeymoon or like a trip where you won't have access to the gym and you have a lot of shitty food, like a buffet, cruise kind of thing. Like that would just, no, okay? Have some fucking forethought, foresight, whatever. Hacks for high appetite people: fiber, water, protein. Intermittent fasting can work really well for some, other people not at all. Not trying to maintain too lean of a physique. If you used to be obese and you get down to say like 12 or 13%, your appetite might be super fucking high, but if you get it down to like 16, 18%, you might feel fine. So sometimes your appetite is high because you're just too goddamn lean for you. And I want to know your honest opinion about the body fat set point. Is there any evidence to it? Yeah, there is quite a bit. In your opinion, is 12 to 15% body fat maintainable for everyone? I'm going to say no, because everyone is just such a broad term. There are going to be people who either cannot or should not maintain 12 to 15%. They'll feel better, they'll look better, quality of life will be better at 15 to 20%. And there's nothing wrong with being 15 to 20%. Especially once you have a good deal of muscle, you're going to look like a fucking tank at 15 to 20%. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And, don't feel bad if you have to maintain a slightly higher body fat percentage. Even 20 to 22%, not really anything wrong with that either. And again, if your quality of life is in the shitter because you're trying to maintain your abs, get real, man. Like, it might not be meant to be. And if it's something like you need in your life, or like you need that to get chicks, or like you're like trying to be a fashion model, might not be meant to be. Mostly low quality women are the ones who like abs anyway. So if that's what you're into, fair enough. Number 99, might finish this in under 4 fucking hours. I started earlier today. Last time I was going from like noon until 4 o'clock, and I usually go to the gym at 2 o'clock, and I was just fucking pissed the entire time because I was pushing back my workout. I started earlier this time. It's 1:30. All right. Anyway, what's your take / info on preventing hunger impacting your sleep when cutting? This is partly deficit, partly leanness. So some people, they eat at maintenance, and because they're too lean, it impacts their sleep and irritability and cortisol and a lot of stuff. Other people, they find it's mostly the deficit. So I would say go slow. Carbs before sleep might help some people. Other people, it'll actually negatively impact your sleep. So are you a type where the insulin disrupts your sleep and you get benefit, or do you like get benefit from the serotonin release and it helps knock you the fuck out? So that is quite individual, and experiment with both. Also, lower carb hurts some people's sleep. Other people, it helps their sleep. Once they're in ketosis, they sleep like a fucking baby. It's super individual. Question 100, while it isn't wise, safest way to crash diet? Don't operate heavy machinery or cars when you're like tanking your carbs down and you're used to carbs, because you could get dizzy and not have a good situation. It's really not a good idea. It doesn't end well in most cases. Depends what you mean by crash diet. If you're very active, 1,000 calorie surplus could be doable. It depends on what you mean by crash diet. I would say keep your carbs reasonable if that's what you need. Protein fairly high. Prioritize sleep. Make sure your training is good. Add cardio rather than tanking your calories, or add a mix of both. And don't feel the need to rush unless there's something that you have to actually prepare for. A little bit of foresight can go a long way. And just stretching a diet out from like 4 weeks to 8 weeks, if you can do it, or 12 weeks even, that can help so much. All right, next one, 101. What is your view on a very slow rate of weight loss, under 0.5% per week, with the goal of reaching a new body weight set point, only maintenance, no bulk after? Mike Israel, for instance, supports a faster rate of weight loss and claims that slower rates of weight loss can lead to tracking issues. Yeah, I mean, and then it goes on, blah, 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 blah. But, yeah, no, if you're in like a 200 or 300 calorie deficit, you might not be in a deficit, okay? Because tracking your calories can be a lot more difficult than people in the fitness industry think. And then also tracking your activity, I mean, that's like a total crapshoot for a lot of people. So I would say, unless you're very, very lean, 500 minimum. Like, don't pussyfoot around the cut. If you're gonna cut. Don't be a wuss about it. I know that's like kind of a hard line. 1,000 calories is like an excessive cut for some people, but people who can't stick to a 500 calorie, like normal size people who can't, and normal leanness who can't stick to a 500 calorie deficit, you're not going to get better results from a super slow cut, because you're just going to be cutting longer. It's going to be even worse, and then you might not be in an actual deficit. All right, next one. Is there a minimum number of calories or macros that you would suggest not going below when cutting for the average guy? So protein, I usually set it at like 1.6 grams per kilo, but if it's a little bit lower, like not the end of the world. Carbs, depends on the individual and the type of diet. Fats, I would say I usually cap guys at like, sounds dirty, at around 40 grams-ish. I mean, if you go down to 35, like 30 for a few days, not the end of the world. But long term, like you want to be above 40 grams. How do you even eat and not get 40 grams of fat? Like, what the fuck are you eating? Rice cakes and guar gum stuck together with protein powder? Fuck off. Like, that's just a horrible way to exist. For naturals, especially. As for a number of calories, I would say don't go too much below BMR, basal metabolic rate. So you can find this with a calculator online. Just search BMR calculator, and I wouldn't go too much below that. You're better off increasing your activity and then just taking a longer term approach. If it's much below BMR, that's when you run into issues with adherence and sustainability. What are your thoughts on high rep burpee routines for fat loss that are becoming popular on YouTube via channels like Iron Wolves? I'm not familiar with Iron Wolves. I'm familiar with burpees. If you like burpees, do burpees. If you don't like burpees, don't ever feel the need to do burpees. They're nothing spectacular. Like, if you have access to a form of cardio that you like and you don't like burpees, don't fucking do burpees. That simple. Next, how big of a deficit do you think you can have before you start to lose muscle? It depends. So try this one on for size. Let's say you're in a 100 calorie surplus. You stop lifting weights, you dump your protein super low, and you start running large amounts. So obviously you're going to be eating a lot more if you're more active, but you're still in a slight caloric surplus. You're going to lose muscle, even in a surplus. Whereas let's say if you're in a very large deficit, 1,000 calories per day, but you're a high body fat percentage, you're not doing like crazy amounts of cardio, you're weight training, you're sensitive to weight training, you're a beginner, and you're taking anabolic steroids, and you're in this huge deficit, you're still going to gain a fuck ton of muscle. So it's less about surplus or deficit and more about the individual factors like stimulating muscle growth, the macronutrients, hormones, etc. Calories in, calories out are very, very important, but they're certainly not everything. And I'll do a full video on that because I think it's an important topic. All right, next one. If I'm cutting, does the location where I get the calories matter? Yeah, you're going to want to put it in the mouth. Other holes don't work as well. So can I still lose weight if I eat pizza and burgers? Sorry, I misunderstood you there. But stay below maintenance. Yes, you can lose fat eating literally any food ever, okay? You can fry turds in batter and lose weight eating that if you really want to, okay? You can deep fry Twinkies and lose lots of fat. It's just going to be really, really shitty because you won't be able to eat very much food, and you're also going to be deficient in a lot of micronutrients, as well as just really be hungry all the goddamn time. So in practice, the foods you eat matter, but if you're willing to suffer, you can eat shitty Franken foods that are very high calorie density foods and still get to your goals. It's just not what I would actually advise. All right, next one. How do I know how many calories I should eat to get lean but prevent muscle loss? So again, aim for around a pound per week or so, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower. But it requires personal experimentation. And there's just no way I can say 2,226 just based on your 12-word maybe answer question. So super individual, take accountability, experiment, and see what works for you and what allows you to lose weight at a sustainable, manageable rate where you can actually maintain or maybe even gain muscle while getting to your goals. Next one, another fasting question. Can 16-8 intermittent fasting be detrimental to muscle growth? So you're sleeping for 8 hours a day and then you're just not eating the first 8 hours of your waking hours, and then you eat all your food in the last 8 hours. It's kind of similar to what I do. I have casein, coffee, protein shake thing. And then I go to the gym, so I'm basically eating 2 to 10. Actually less than that. It's actually a tighter window. I did a full video. Just search like full 2 days of eating or something. It's different on the weekends. Again, I eat very flexibly. Can 16-8 be detrimental to muscle growth? Only if you're super freaking lean and you actually need those extra protein feedings in the morning or at night or however you're setting it up. But I would say no. For most people, 8 hours is enough time to get in plenty of food, plenty of feedings, plenty of protein, and so it should be okay. But if you don't have that much appetite and you're chronically under eating and you're not getting enough protein, in that case, yes, it might be detrimental to muscle growth. Our next question, once you do a peak week for AMRAPs or 1 rep maxes for your mesocycle after a deload week, do you do another deload week after? Sometimes I feel taxed, don't we all? Fucking Uncle Sam. But it's hard to gauge if I should push through with low volume or deload entirely for the next week. Okay, so makes it very tough when you're programming during a cut. I feel like that last sentence is just to like slip it in to a cutting Q&A. But I'll include it, why not? You hacked the system, congrats. So you're having deload, AMRAP or 1 rep maxes, and then another deload. I don't think AMRAPs or 1 rep maxes should be viewed as that taxing, unless you're like ridiculously strong and you're AMRAPing 600, 700, 800 pounds from the deadlift or something, or squatting or whatever, or like benching 400 or 500 pounds. For a normal person, you don't need to have deload, max, deload. Okay, that is just, if you feel taxed, it's something other than the max. Hey. All right, next one. How long does it take for your hormones to return to normal levels in maintenance after a prolonged cut? I don't know. I would Google that. I've seen some research where it's like a few weeks with bodybuilders who get super lean and then they rebound. Part of it is, if you get super lean, part of it is the deficit, but part of it is the body fat percentage as well. And so if you go down to like 4 or 5% and you're just fucking peeled out of your Sazul tree or whatever, maintenance isn't going to solve your problems. Your problem is a lack of body fat, and maintenance is not going to solve that. Okay, so you need to gain body fat. Even if you're 7 or 8% or 9%, you might need to gain body fat in order to normalize your hormones. So I would say it depends on how long the cut was, how hard the cut was, and how deep you got into body fat percentage land. All right, next one. What are the pros and cons of doing a slow cut around 0.5 body fat, body weight per week versus a recomp if your body fat is between 20 and 25%? So I did a different question. You can search it as well. But I would say if you're okay being 20 to 25%, a recomp is fine. But if you feel like you want to get leaner, then a slow cut is fine. It just depends on what you want. There's no like really fixed answer. There's also nothing really wrong with being 20 to 25% body fat, especially if it's on the lower side of that, and especially if you're active, if you are, have a healthy diet, etc. So yeah, it's really up to you. And this is sort of, when I work with a client, I ask them what their goals are. I never assume what someone's goals are just on how they look or on their training history. I straight up ask them, what are your goals? Okay, so in this situation, I don't have the information, so I don't know. All right, next one, kind of a long one. My upper body is pretty lean with veins, but I carry all my body fat in my love handles and belly. Typical dude, I assume. I cannot get rid of fat in these stubborn body parts for the life of me. I've cut for 6 months straight, and it just seemed like my physique stayed the same but shrunk a couple of inches. I assume you don't mean height. That would be weird. I lost weight but didn't see much more definition. I've never seen my abs. What can a naturally larger person do in this situation to get rid of body fat, or am I doomed by my genetics? I doubt it's genetics. It could be a few different things. A picture would help a lot here. I would say try to maintain for a little bit. If you've been cutting for 6 months, like actually cutting for 6 months, you've either lost a lot of weight, and therefore maintenance makes a lot of sense, or you haven't lost very much weight and you don't know how to cut very well. I've seen this all the time. People are like, I've been cutting for 6 months. I'm like, how much weight have you lost? 5 kilos. What? How did that take that long? And there's nothing wrong with going slow, but at a certain point, like, you're just pissing away time. So I would say it's probably not genetics, but also, like, why do you want to see your abs? What's your goal? Like, why do you have a goal of seeing your abs? you might be better off maintaining or even going into a lean bulk, and then later returning to that goal if it's still a goal and you still want to have abs. Because sometimes, like, you want something so much, you're just attacking it, but you won't get it until you target it later when you've targeted another goal in between, if that makes sense. Next one, why is it harder to sleep the leaner you get? Is there ways around this? Yes and no. If it's an issue with being too lean, you're gonna have to gain body fat. Like, some people, seen this several times where someone's like, I'm 11%, and every time I go to 10%, my sleep goes to shit. And sometimes it's like 13% to 12%, sometimes it's 9% to 8%, but there's like this wall that once they go past it, hey wife, once they go past it, their energy goes down and their sleep gets affected. And so it's not the deficit necessarily, it's just the fact that they're trying to get too lean, at least at that point in time. This is really excessive texting. But I would say this is, cortisol, adrenaline, just lack of carbohydrates, lack of energy, and then just being too lean. And sometimes there are ways around this with diet breaks and refeeds and timing of carbohydrates, but often there's simply not. All right, the next one, I'm bulking and I train my forearms and traps twice a week after doing legs. When I start my cut, can I start doing them once per week instead and drop them from one of my leg days, since these two muscles are involved in a lot of pulling and pushing exercises? Yeah, I mean, if you want, sure, but don't expect them to really improve. I would keep your frequency the same and reduce the volume a little bit if you need, but generally speaking, I'd rather keep the frequency if that's what you've been doing, because that is a big driver of progress, especially if you've seen results from doing that. All right, question 114, in the home stretch. I'm actually really hungry now. I recently have COVID, but after recovering from that, I'm finding too hard to go back on diet and have gained weight a lot, and I've gained a lot of fat because there was not much to do during COVID. That's not a fucking excuse, come on. I was just sitting in my room and eating all day long and binge watching. Come on. I don't want to seem heartless, but come on. And now it has become a habit. I am so messed up and don't know where to start. Just start. Just start, okay? Throw out all your shitty food in the house. Make a big show of it. Tell people what you're going to do. Fucking commit to it. Draw a fucking hard line in the sand and say, no, it's done. We had our fun during this time. It was an exception, but, that time is over. Get back to it and do it sooner rather than later, because especially if you develop these bad habits, they can stick with you for decades. And be really proactive with this, and be aggressive. Be fucking aggressive with it, with changing your habits and lifestyle, because I think, pussyfooting around this, I've said pussyfoot like 8 times during this video, but really, like, that's not really an excuse in my book. I realize everyone's book is a little bit different, but just because, like, you were in quarantine, that's not an excuse to eat shitty food and get fat. I know I probably have a more hardcore mindset than most people, but yeah, my advice is just to cut that shit out. You know what you have to do. The fact that you're writing it in a questionnaire, in a quick Q&A, means you know what you have to do, so fucking do it. Next question, a little bit similar. Been on a cut since February, maintained consistent 700 calorie deficit. This is what the previous person should do, pretty much. Steadily lost, okay, maybe not entirely, we'll see. Steadily lost 25 pounds of COVID weight. It's good. Back to being lean, 14 to 15% body fat. All my lifts back to full strength or PRs. Nice work. Workouts are now feeling harder to get through, and progress is slowed. Think I should increase calories to give myself a break. Thoughts? If so, should it be to maintenance, small deficit, or small surplus? Thanks, love the channel. Thank you. I would say maintenance or small surplus would both be fine. Okay, 14 to 15%, especially if you've already lost 10 plus kilos and you've been dieting for 3 months now. That's almost exactly what I've done. 10 kilos, 3 months. So I would say maintenance to small surplus, and you can give yourself a range between 0 and 200 or 100 and 300 or something like that. But yeah, it sounds like your cut is done. All right, next one. I did cut and drop calorie, hopefully more than 1 calorie. I did circuit training with medium weight and jumping rope cardio. I lost weight but got fatter. I'm sorry. How did this happen? I lose 20 pounds, but body fat went up 5%. I shouldn't laugh. How? Make me frustrate and I stop working out. Thanks. Sorry to hear that. Medium weights and circuit training is usually not a great situation for gaining muscle. Okay? So just because you're in a caloric deficit, which you clearly were if you lost 20 pounds, that doesn't necessarily mean... But your body fat went up 5%. That means you lost like an ungodly amount of muscle. How are you measuring these numbers? Okay, that's what is probably wrong. If you look fatter, you might just be like fluffier. This is a weird situation. Clearly your training was not good if you lost muscle and look worse when you lost 20 pounds. Okay, so I would say get your training in order, start lifting decently heavy, closer to failure, more like reasonable bodybuilding style of training rather than the circuit training, whatever you're doing. If you are limited in weights, like you're working at home or whatever, and you just can't lift heavy because you don't have enough materials, go closer to failure, okay? Most circuit training is like, I do some push-ups, then I do some inverted rows, and like, none of it's actually stimulatory enough to trigger muscle growth. Trigger! And so it sounds like your training is very suboptimal, and it might also be a diet issue where your protein is too low, but it's hard to say. Plus, it's also maybe a measuring issue. If your body fat scale is like, fuck you, that could be part of it too. Next one, how to cut to not lose a drastic amount of strength. Search the other answers. High protein, stay hydrated, carbs around the workout. I'm repeating myself a lot here. Not a huge deficit. Take your time. Prioritize sleep. All right, the next one. During cutting phases, how do you know whether you're losing muscle or not? Do you also have to keep lifting the same numbers in order to preserve as much muscle mass as possible? Yes, I would say so. You know, if your squat absolutely tanks, like my brain cells are tanking right now, you're probably losing muscle mass, especially if you're in a deficit, and especially if it's over the long term. Like if you have one bad workout, it doesn't mean you lost muscle. Could just be lower energy, less glycogen, worse leverages, worse sleep, less neural output, whatever. But like if you used to squat 140 kilos and now you can only manage 120 kilos for the same reps consistently, not a good sign, okay? Same thing for any lift. You are going to want to keep as much strength as possible. With the knowledge that eventually in any cut you'll probably lose some strength. But, you know, keep protein high, keep measuring, you know, your arms, your legs, etc. And just try to, prioritize sleep, etc. And try to optimize the training as much as you can, even with the knowledge that it's going to be a lot more difficult. Next one, how long do you recommend a cut should last? Are there refeeds? Also, are refeeds, diet breaks, cheat meals effective? Again, it depends on your goals. Like, I answered this before, but basically, as long as it needs to get to your goals. Refeeds, fine. Diet breaks, also fine, especially more in the long term. Cheat meals, if you want to call them that, that's fine. I don't define them like that because I think that's sort of an immature way to go about things, but if that's what floats your crumpet, whatever. Next question, kind of an interesting one. Hypothetical question. Would it be possible for someone to be in a caloric deficit and gain enough muscle for their overall body weight to increase despite being in a caloric deficit? If this is the case, then one could gain body weight without ever eating in a surplus, which seems counterintuitive because the body would be seemingly creating mass out of thin air. No. Think about it like this. You have a pile of fat. You have a pile of muscle. The fat has more energy per gram of weight. You take the fat, you burn it, you use that energy to create muscle. Because this muscle is mostly water, it's like 70-80% water, it's more volume per calorie expended. So you can be in a deficit, losing a lot of this fat, burning it to create muscle, especially if you're on anabolic steroids, etc. So yes, you can be in a deficit and be gaining body weight. Mind fucking blown. Similarly, you can be in a surplus and be losing fat. Because you're in, say, a 100 calorie surplus, a barely small amount, and you're using, say, 200 calories to build muscle. So that 100 calories that you're consuming extra goes to building muscle, and so does 100 calories from that big old blob of fat, that pile of fat. Therefore, you will be losing body fat. And in the extreme, you might actually lose body weight. I mean, it's not very common, and I wouldn't expect it at all, but it's possible. Like you can lose fat in a surplus. Whether it would be the same as, like, you might actually still gain body weight actually because, again, the muscle's heavier. But this is still, not a very realistic situation for most people. Next one, is it normal to lose size in your biceps when cutting? Also during weight loss phase, is it normal to look small? Yeah, you might look smaller, especially if your glycogen is lower. You'll look flatter and maybe like even puffier or like retaining water. So yeah, it's normal to look small. But once you like get all these serratuses and stuff going, you'll look bigger, especially in the right lighting, camera angles, whatever. Is it normal to lose size in your biceps when cutting? Yeah. For you to maintain your size of your arms, you're losing fat. Therefore, if you maintain your size, it means you're gaining significant amounts of muscle to replace that fat. So, I would say for most people when they're cutting, they're going to lose leg size, maybe calf size, maybe arm size, maybe even neck size. But that doesn't mean you're losing muscle, because you might be losing the fat inside and around the muscle. All right, next one from Real Natural Bodybuilding. Good channel. Go check his stuff out. Are you planning on getting the leanest you've ever been in years to come? Maybe transiently, but it's not like I don't have a burning desire to get super fucking diced. It's not great for long-term progress. It's I wouldn't say it's time wasted, but like if you're continually cutting too much, it's kind of time wasted because you're not really going to be gaining muscle during those times. It is good for social media. Like, that's not the biggest reason why I do it, but realistically, it is, I typically maintain 15 to 20%, and then occasionally go down into the sort of 12 to 15%. But if I feel good, I might go, closer down to 10%. I usually just sort of go by feel. I don't have any plans on doing bodybuilding shows. That seems just horrible. Like, no, not for me at all. I did a full video on why I don't do natural bodybuilding. A whole bunch of reasons. Nuh-uh. But yeah, getting semi-lean for me is not a big issue. So I'm actually pretty comfortable, fairly lean, just based on my training history, genetics, etc. All right, next one. Do adults really have high or low metabolism such that some people can eat high-calorie diets and not get fat without exercising, and the opposite happens to others? The majority of this is not basal metabolic rate, which does vary a little bit, but not as much as people think. A lot of fat people are like, I have a slow metabolism. How do you know? Have you actually checked? 99 times out of 100, they haven't fucking checked. Like, oh, I have a thyroid issue. Some do, a lot don't. Like, I'm fat, therefore I must be metabolically, hormonally fucked. No, a lot of it is just bad decisions, naturally high appetite, and just being sedentary, not taking care of themselves, etc. So I think metabolism gets blamed way more than is actually the case. There are a lot of fat people with fast metabolisms, and there are a lot of lean people with slow metabolisms. I would say there's probably not a correlation, but it does happen because metabolism is not the only thing. Change in volume when cutting. So I would say, I've answered this before. Just search volume somewhere, and it'll probably go down at some point as you run into potential recovery issues, but you shouldn't assume it'll go down. Like if you feel fine on your normal volume, there's no need to be like, oh, well, I'm cutting, I should reduce my volume. No, okay, keep it high if you feel fine. If you normally do high volume, if you normally do low volume, then just keep it low. It really depends. It's quite individual. Some people thrive on lower volume. Other people seem to do the best on higher volume. Both can work for various people. All right, the next question. Do you recommend a diet break after cutting, not at goal yet? So I guess like you're partway through the process. How long would you recommend cutting before doing a diet break? How long would you recommend a diet break before going back to fat loss again? Okay, so I would say if it hasn't been a month, you probably don't need a diet break. 2 to 3 months, somewhere in there. Maybe 6 weeks, but probably not. Like 8 would be good. And then 1 or 2 weeks, I would say, is a reasonable amount. You can sort of go by feel after a while. Like once you know yourself pretty well, you'll know after a week, like, all right, are my energy levels back again? Am I ready to really attack the next whatever kilos or pounds? So I'd say 1 or 2 weeks for the diet break, and then every 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, something like that. Maybe 3 months, but that's a long time. If you need diet breaks super frequently, you're probably like actually yo-yo dieting. You might be better off with a smaller deficit, more reasonable and sustainable rate of fat loss. Next question, you frequently say bulk and then cut is an optimal strategy for naturals. What would you say is the ideal ratio in terms of months? For example, 3 months bulking, 1 month cutting would be good. Or should it be shorter or longer? Excuse me. Hiccups. All right, so the main thing is that muscle growth is going to be slower than fat loss. Always. Okay, unless you're like super anabolic, but even then, like fat loss is way, way faster in terms of like per pound or kilo of fat loss is going to be much, much faster than muscle growth. The more advanced you are, the slower the muscle growth realistically will be. However, fat loss doesn't change. Okay, so a beginner can bulk more aggressively in terms of the weight gain because they can gain a higher amount of muscle because they're farther away from their potential and they're very sensitive to training, newbie gains, etc. A more advanced athlete will have to have a smaller surplus. They just realistically will. Does this change the ratio? Not really. I would say 3 to 1 is reasonable, but bulk when you can with the minimum amount of fat gain, whether you're a beginner or more advanced, and then cut down the fat. As for the ratio, I don't think it's something that you can actually like predict or schedule out. I know some coaches do. I don't really like doing that. I like to monitor things in real life. So when I go to a client, I'm not like, okay, we have 3 months of bulking, 1 month, or 4 months of bulking, 1 month of cutting. I mean, it can work, obviously, but I think it's better just to have a certain body fat percentage window. And then, we say, okay, well, you've gotten to 21%. Let's do a mini cut, get you back down closer to 15, 16 or something like that. I think that's a better way to go about things than having like a preset ratio. But just generally speaking, you want to spend more time bulking than cutting in basically every single circumstance because you can only gain muscle so quickly, but you can lose fat super quickly. So gain slowly, cut quickly, and then just repeat. All right, next one. What is the most optimal rate to cut for natties to preserve as much muscle and strength as possible? Furthermore, how much cardio or step count would you say is good enough with lifting being the primary goal? Awesome job, by the way, Jeffrey. Keep up the fantastic work. Thank you. I would say, again, depends on your leanness. If you are thick boy mode, bear mode, chunk mode, master mode, whatever, you can lose very quickly the first few weeks. And a lot of that's going to be water, But like your fat loss can also be very impressive in terms of the rate, because you have more to lose and you're very sensitive to the process. Your metabolism is still essentially bulked up, etc. As you get leaner, it's going to have to slow down. I would say in that mid-range, a pound per week is a good amount. Leaner, half a pound. Like fatter, a pound and a half, 2 pounds, somewhere around there. How much cardio is good enough, or step count? Again, it varies. 10K is a good round number, but if you don't hit 10K, you can still absolutely lose fat. I mean, I've seen people get 20K and still gain fat. So, like, it's certainly not a magic bullet. All right, almost done, and it's a little after 2 o'clock, so actually we'll get in my workout this time. What tends to be the body fat level that is the sweet spot for being able to increase performance and gain strength without having to bulk and cut? As in, you are an athlete who cannot just bulk and pack on 10 pounds of fat just to gain muscle faster. Well, no one should really do that. It depends on your sport. If you are a sprinter, you got to be lean. You don't see 15, 16, 18% body fat sprinters. They're all close to 10%, okay? And some are even leaner. Now, a lot of them are not natural, like at the highest level especially, but in general, if you're moving your body, having less fat is going to be a significant advantage. And so I would say, yeah, prioritize leanness. If you're a fucking sumo wrestler, fat might actually be useful. It might actually, if you're a football lineman, if you're moving yourself into other things or people, having more fat, more mass to move might be good. So I think it really just depends on the sport. And it could be anywhere from like 8% up to 40 or 50%. It matters based on what kind of athlete you are. Next question, second to last one, I think. How big is the impact of protein-sparing effect of carbs and fats in a deficit? In an Asian diet, sometimes I struggle to get 2 grams per pound of body weight of protein daily. That's a fuck ton of protein in any diet. I mean, even if you're an Eskimo, that's a shit ton of protein. Well, not a shit ton, because you don't really, like, you're not going to be shitting if you're an Eskimo. Probably. I made that up. Am I optimally minimizing muscle breakdown? Alright, well, I'm guessing the magnitude of the deficit also matters. Yes, say 500 calories per day for 1 pound of fat loss per week. Yeah, your protein matters, but like, I think it's overrated. I'm just throwing it out there. I think it's overrated. And you can eat a shit ton of protein and still lose muscle if you're not getting in like the correct hormonal environment, if you're not getting in your sleep, if your training sucks, etc. Like, there are a lot of people who are hitting the requisite protein. They're not gaining fuck all in terms of muscle. Well, they are gaining fuck all. They're not getting very much muscle. The brain is not functioning. Clearly not in ketosis. So yeah, I would say you don't need that much protein, ever. And if you think you do, you're probably compensating for the training, which should probably be the main focus. All right, last question, 130. So my mom is obese, and I'm trying to help her lose weight. What's the best way? So, yeah, again, I get a ton of information about clients, and there is no best way. There might be a best way for you, but even then, chasing perfection is not always the right thing. You see some people, they have to have everything right. It has to be the best way, the secret diet, the magic pill. Whereas usually just cleaning up your diet and making generally better choices is going to be all that is needed to get you or her towards her goals. So, make sure she understands about calories, about food choices, is getting in plenty of fiber, vegetables, lean meats, whole grains, carbohydrates, but like healthy sources. If she's not doing ketosis, which, maybe is right for her, maybe isn't, hard to say. And yeah, just support her, make sure that she's consistent, maybe try to keep her accountable without being a dick about it. I don't know, like there's a lot of different strategies that I use with clients, and a couple sentences isn't quite enough information for me to say what the best way is in this case. And luckily the best way isn't even needed. because again, you just need to have a pretty good diet in order to cut successfully. All right, so I think I'll leave it there. I don't know how long this was. Looks like at least a few hours, but I can definitively say this is, well, maybe not definitively, but I would say this is probably the best and biggest cutting Q&A in YouTube history. So thank you for being a part of history. If you watched everything, hope you learned something useful. Grab a copy of my book, Sweat. Maybe the editor will feel generous and put a graphic here. If not, it'll be in the description down below. Thank you so much for the support and keeping this channel ad-free. This would be a fuck ton of ads on this video. Could be making bank. Instead, I prefer to monetize through the book anyway. Thank you so much for the support. Make sure to like this epic, behemoth, gargantuan, colossal beast of a video, and I will see all of y'all in that next video. Peace. Happy cutting.